Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from, so feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us.
Weird things have happened in my house for as long as I can remember, long before I was old enough to understand what was going on, and long before I ever experienced anything myself. These weren't just one-off moments that could easily be brushed away. They were spread out over years, sometimes decades, touching different people in my family at different stages of their lives. When you hear them individually, they sound strange. When you put them all together, they feel harder to ignore. The earliest story doesn't even belong to me. It comes from my mom, and it happened before I was born, when my older brothers were still very young. At the time, my parents lived in the same house we would all later grow up in. My brothers were toddlers then, one around 4 years old and the other barely one. Well, they were at that age where noise and chaos were just part of everyday life. According to my mom, there was a large painting hanging in the living room. It was a picture of a ship at sea, framed and fairly heavy. It hung on the wall near an archway that led into the dining room. Nothing about it was unusual, and it had been there for a long time without issue. One day, my brothers were in their bedroom clowning around, making noise like kids do. My mom was in another part of the house when she heard them getting especially loud, so she went into their bedroom to see what they were up to. She was standing there dealing with them when she suddenly heard a series of loud, heavy thumps coming from the living room. Not a single crash, multiple thumps. She immediately thought one of the boys had somehow gotten out and knocked something over. But both kids were right there in front of her. My dad was at work at the time, so there was no one else in the house. The noise was loud enough that it made her heart jump, and she rushed back into the living room to see what had happened. What she found didn't make sense. The painting was no longer on the wall. It hadn't just fallen straight down either. Somehow, it had come off the wall, crossed through the archway into the dining room, and ended up resting upright against the opposite wall. Not face down, not smashed. Upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there. There was no explanation for how it could have moved like that on its own. It would have had to fall, bounce, and change direction in a way that didn't seem physically possible. There was nothing broken. No hooks ripped from the wall in a way that explained momentum. It just wasn't where it was supposed to be. My mom was shaken enough that when my dad got home, she insisted the painting be removed from the house completely. She didn't want it rehung. She didn't want it stored somewhere else. She wanted it gone. And so it was. At the time, that was the end of it. Just a strange story my parents would mention occasionally, usually with a nervous laugh. Something weird, but distant. Something that happened before I was old enough to remember. Years later, things started happening again. When I was 15, my great-grandmother passed away. Her death hit the family hard. She had been around for as long as anyone could remember. One of those people who felt permanent simply because they'd always been there. After she died, something in the house changed. It wasn't dramatic all at once. It was subtle at first, almost easy to miss. But for about a year after her death, strange things happened in our house with uncomfortable frequency. One of the first things I experienced myself happened while I was in bed. I was awake, not drifting off, not half asleep. I remember lying there clearly, staring at the wall, when I suddenly felt an arm wrap around my waist. It wasn't a vague sensation, it felt deliberate, like someone pulling me closer. My body reacted instantly. My heart jumped, and I sucked in a sharp breath. There was no one there. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Just that unmistakable feeling of being touched. I lay there frozen for several seconds, too scared to move, my mind racing through explanations that didn't make sense. Eventually, I forced myself to sit up and turn around. I'm fully expecting to see someone behind me. The room was empty. Another time, my eldest brother had something happen while he was sleeping. He woke up suddenly to the feeling of his covers being pulled over him, tugged tight around his body. He thought maybe one of us was messing with him, but when he sat up and looked around, no one was there. Everyone else in the house was asleep. Around the same time, our computer started acting strangely. It would turn itself on at random hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day. At first, we blamed electrical issues or settings we didn't understand. But one day, it turned on while I was sitting directly in front of it, without anyone touching it. The screen flickered to life on its own, the fans spinning up, as if someone had pressed the power button. That moment unsettled me deeply because it removed any comfortable distance between the experience and me. It wasn't something that happened when no one was around. I was right there. The house never felt violent or threatening, but it didn't feel empty either. There was a sense of presence, like someone moving through familiar spaces without ever fully revealing themselves. It was unsettling in a quiet, persistent way. My dad had his own experiences too, though they happened outside the house. He worked at a convenience store, often late shifts. While he was there, strange things would happen that he couldn't easily explain. Slushy lids would flick out of their holders on their own, popping up and clattering onto the counter or floor with no one nearby. His car, parked in the lot outside, would sometimes flash its headlights for no apparent reason. The automatic doors at the store would open and close repeatedly when no customers were around, triggering the sensors over and over. At first, he tried to explain it away as mechanical issues, faulty sensors, electrical glitches. But these things happened too often, and not always when equipment was acting up in other ways. Sometimes he would just stand there behind the counter, watching the doors slide open to an empty parking lot, feeling uneasy. He eventually started joking about it, saying that whoever or whatever it was really wanted attention. He'd laugh and shake his head, but you could tell it bothered him more than he let on. There was something about the persistence of it that got under his skin. Back at home, things eventually settled down. After about a year, the activity slowed and then seemed to stop altogether. Life went on. We grew older. The house felt normal again, at least on the surface. Then, years later, it started up again. By this time, my brother and his fiancée had moved into the house for a while. I wasn't living there anymore, but I heard about what happened from both of them afterward. His fiancée, who later became my sister-in-law, is very open about being sensitive to things most people don't notice. She's into spiritual stuff, intuition, all of that. She describes herself as psychic, and whether you believe in that or not, she's always been confident in her perceptions. One night, she was in the bedroom when something appeared. She described it as a woman with long black hair. Not fully solid, not fully transparent either. The way she explained it was strange. She said it looked like the woman was pulled into the room, as if sucked through some kind of vortex or tear in the air. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment, this figure was there. The woman walked around the bed calmly, as if she knew the space. There was no panic, no rush, no aggression. She moved with purpose, like someone who belonged there. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she disappeared again, fading out of sight. My sister-in-law wasn't hysterical when she talked about it. She didn't scream or run from the room. She was shaken, but more curious than anything else. She felt certain it was a woman, and certain it wasn't her imagination. What's unsettling is how this story lines up with everything else. A woman's presence, long black hair, a sense of familiarity rather than hostility. The timing, years after my great-grandmother's death, but still connected to the same house. Looking back at all of it, what gets to me isn't any single incident. It's the pattern. The way different people at different times experience things that felt connected. The way the activity seemed to cluster around certain moments, certain losses, certain changes in the household. Some people would say it's all coincidence. Old houses make noise. Electronics glitch. Sleep does strange things to the mind. Grief can heighten perception. And maybe that's true. Maybe every single thing has a rational explanation when viewed in isolation. But when you put it all together, it feels different. It feels like something that never fully left. Something that moved quietly through our lives, occasionally reminding us that it was there. Not angry, not violent, just present. Sometimes I think about that painting, about how it ended up standing upright against a wall it shouldn't have been able to reach. Sometimes I think about that feeling of an arm around my waist, or the sound of the computer turning itself on. Sometimes I think about my dad standing behind the counter at work, watching doors open to nothing. And sometimes I think about that woman with long black hair, stepping into a bedroom like she had every right to be there. Whether it was my great-grandmother or something else entirely, I don't know. I don't claim to understand it. I just know that weird things have happened in that house over the years, to too many people to completely dismiss. And even now, when I visit, when the house is quiet and everyone is asleep, there are moments when it feels like someone is still there, moving just out of sight, watching, waiting, reminding us that some places remember the people who lived in them long after they're gone. I was in the hospital this past August, recovering from an injury that had left me stuck in a bed longer than I was comfortable with. Hospitals have a strange way of making time feel stretched and compressed at the same time. Days blur together, nights feel endless, and your sense of what is normal slowly slips away. Even when nothing particularly bad is happening, the environment itself wears you down. The constant beeping of machines, the footsteps in the hallway, the muffled voices at odd hours, and the harsh lighting that never fully lets you forget where you are all add up. I had been there for a while already, long enough to feel disconnected from the outside world. My body was sore, weak, and slow to respond. My mind felt foggy most of the time, partly from pain, partly from the medication. And the doctors were managing my pain with Dilaudid at first, and then they started transitioning me to oxycodone. I understood why they were doing it, and medically it made sense, but the shift in medication definitely affected how I felt. My thoughts felt heavier. My sleep was broken and strange. I would drift in and out, never fully rested, never fully awake. Sleep in a hospital isn't real sleep. It's more like a series of shallow naps interrupted by noise, checks, and discomfort. Someone is always coming in to check vitals, adjust something, or ask a question. Even when they try to be quiet, the sounds carry. On top of that, there was a guy down the hall who was particularly noisy. He wasn't doing anything wrong exactly, but he talked loudly, sometimes yelled, sometimes laughed at inappropriate hours. His voice echoed down the corridor, especially at night when everything else was quieter. Eventually, I gave up trying to ignore it and asked for earplugs. I just wanted one solid stretch of sleep. The nurses brought them, and that night I put them in, hoping it would finally help me rest. The earplugs dulled the noise enough that the hallway sounds faded into the background. I remember feeling a bit relieved as I settled back into bed, adjusting the blankets, staring at the dim ceiling lights, and letting my eyes close. At some point I fell asleep, or at least I thought I did. The next thing I remember is being in that strange in-between state where you're just starting to wake up, but you're not fully conscious yet. My mind was surfacing slowly, like breaking through water. I wasn't dreaming in any clear way, but I wasn't fully awake either. Everything felt muted and distant. Then it happened. A sudden, incredibly loud bang exploded inside my head. That is the only way I can describe it. It wasn't like a normal sound. It wasn't something I heard in the room. It felt internal, like it went off inside my skull. It was so loud and abrupt that it jolted me completely awake in an instant. My heart jumped, my body tensed, and I sucked in a sharp breath without meaning to. It felt like someone had slammed a door right next to my head or dropped something massive from a great height. For a split second, pure panic took over. I lay there, frozen, my heart pounding, my mind racing to figure out what had just happened. My first instinct was that something had exploded, that something terrible had gone wrong somewhere in the hospital. But that thought immediately conflicted with everything else I was experiencing. I was wearing earplugs. If there had been a real explosion or loud noise in the hospital, I would have heard other things too. Shouting, alarms, nurses running, overhead announcements, sirens outside, something. But there was nothing. The room was quiet. The lights were the same. The machines were still beeping in their usual rhythm. The hallway outside my door was silent. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing happened. No follow-up sounds. No reaction from anyone else. No indication that anything external had caused the noise I experienced. That realization was almost as unsettling as the bang itself. If it didn't come from outside, then where did it come from? I checked my body next. My heart was racing. But otherwise I felt the same as I had before. No pain spike, no dizziness, no sudden weakness, just shock. I slowly moved my hands and feet, making sure I still could. Everything worked. I was fully awake now, adrenaline cutting straight through the haze of medication. As I lay there trying to calm myself, another thought surfaced. I knew what this was. I had heard about it before. I had read about it at some point, probably late at night while going down some internet rabbit hole about strange sleep-related experiences. Exploding head syndrome. The name sounds ridiculous, almost like a bad joke, but the experience itself is anything but funny when it happens. Exploding head syndrome is a condition where, during sleep or while waking up, a person experiences a sudden loud noise that isn't real. People describe it as a bang, a crash, or a gunshot, a cymbal clashing, or even an explosion. There is no actual sound. Nothing in the environment causes it. It happens entirely inside the brain. Remembering that explanation changed everything. If I hadn't known what it was, that moment would have been absolutely terrifying. Lying in a hospital bed, drugged, exhausted, half awake, hearing what felt like an explosion inside my head with no external cause could easily make someone think they were having a stroke, a brain bleed, or some other medical emergency. In that environment, your mind is already primed to expect bad news. But because I recognized it, the fear eased just enough for me to breathe through it. That doesn't mean it wasn't disturbing. Knowing what something is doesn't make the experience less intense when it hits you. The bang was still loud, and the shock was still real. My heart still took a long time to settle back into a normal rhythm. I lay there for several minutes, focusing on my breathing, reminding myself that I was okay, that nothing had actually happened, that my brain had simply misfired during the transition between sleep and wakefulness. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I was in a perfect storm for something like that to happen. I was recovering from an injury under physical and emotional stress. My sleep schedule was completely messed up. I was in an unfamiliar environment. I was on strong pain medication, and my body was adjusting to a change in those medications. On top of that, I was wearing earplugs, which altered my perception of sound and silence even more. All of those factors can mess with the brain's normal sleep patterns. So sleep isn't just turning off and on. It's a complex process with different stages, each controlled by precise timing and chemical signals. When that system gets disrupted, strange things can happen. The brain can fire signals at the wrong time. Sensations can bleed into each other. The line between dreaming and waking can blur. Exploding head syndrome often happens right at that boundary. As I lay there, fully awake now, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. The dim glow of the hospital room, the faint hum of machines, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the weight of the blankets. Everything felt very real, almost too real, like my senses had been turned up after the shock. I didn't fall back asleep right away. Instead, I replayed the moment in my head, over and over, trying to understand exactly how it felt. The suddenness of it was the worst part. There was no buildup, no warning. One moment I was drifting upward from sleep, the next moment my brain detonated with sound. It made me realize how vulnerable that transition state is. How easily the brain can misinterpret its own signals. Eventually, exhaustion won out. My body was already tired from healing, and the medication still weighed heavy on me. I pulled the blankets up a little higher, adjusted my position, and closed my eyes again. This time, I focused on staying calm, letting my breathing slow naturally. Sleep came back, cautiously, without any further incidents. In the days after that night, I thought about it a lot. I mentioned it to a nurse, more out of curiosity than concern. She nodded knowingly and said she'd heard patients describe similar things before, especially those on certain medications or dealing with irregular sleep. That reassurance helped too. It reminded me that even in a place full of medical equipment and constant monitoring, the brain can still do strange, harmless, but deeply unsettling things. What stayed with me wasn't fear, but appreciation. Appreciation for having known what it was beforehand. There's a huge difference between experiencing something unexplained and experiencing something strange but understood. Knowledge doesn't stop your heart from racing, but it gives you a place to anchor your thoughts. It stops the panic from spiraling into something worse. In a hospital setting, where anxiety is already high, that matters a lot. It also made me think about how many people experience things like this without any context. How many people wake up in the night thinking something terrible has happened, with no idea that their brain is capable of producing such convincing illusions? It's easy to see how stories of unexplained noises, paranormal experiences, or medical emergencies can start from moments like that. The experience itself was brief, lasting only a second or two, but the impact lingered. It reminded me that consciousness is fragile, that the systems we rely on to interpret reality can glitch under the right conditions, and that sometimes the most frightening sensations don't come from outside threats, but from within our own minds. Looking back, I'm grateful that it happened in a way I could understand. Grateful that it didn't escalate into fear or confusion. Grateful that I was able to lie there, calm myself, and move on. Still, I won't pretend it wasn't unsettling. Even now, when I think about that night, I can almost feel that jolt again, that instant of shock, that sudden, impossible sound. It's the kind of experience that sticks with you, not because it harmed you, but because it revealed something strange about how your mind works when you least expect it. If I hadn't known what exploding head syndrome was, that night would have gone very differently in my memory. It would have been marked by fear instead of curiosity, by panic instead of understanding. Instead, it became just another strange story to add to the list. One more reminder that the brain, especially when tired, stressed, and medicated, can create experiences that feel completely real, even when nothing at all is happening. And sometimes, knowing that makes all the difference. From the moment I was born, my godmother was a constant presence in my life. She wasn't just someone who visited on holidays or showed up for special occasions. She helped raise me. She took care of me in ways that went beyond what most people would expect from a godparent. To me, she felt like a second mother, someone woven into the fabric of my childhood so deeply that I can't remember a time when she wasn't there. She believed she had curative powers. That's how everyone described it. And that's how it felt when you were around her. If you had a stomachache, a headache, pain in your body, or some vague discomfort you couldn't explain, she would take out a white towel, say prayers over you, and gently place it where it was needed. Sometimes she would whisper, sometimes she would speak more firmly, but there was always a calm certainty in her voice. Whether it was faith, placebo, or something else entirely, the pain often faded. At the very least, you felt better just being near her. There was something about her presence that made you feel safe. Even as a child, I could sense it. When she walked into a room, things felt calmer, slower, like the world had taken a deep breath. I loved her deeply. In that uncomplicated way children love the people who make them feel protected. I remember going over to her house often. It was right next to my parents' house, close enough that it felt like an extension of home. Her house had a particular atmosphere. It always smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, cooked food, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe incense, maybe old fabric, maybe just the smell of time. There was an old radio that was almost always on, usually playing the news. The signal would fade in and out randomly, crackling and hissing as she cooked or smoked at the kitchen table. She never seemed bothered by it. If the radio cut out, she would just keep going, humming softly or talking to herself. Sometimes, though, she would seem distant. Not in a cold or unkind way, but as if her attention had drifted somewhere else. I would be sitting in the room, playing or watching her cook, and she would suddenly start speaking to the wind. Not loudly, not angrily, just talking. The strange part was the language. It wasn't a language I recognized. Sometimes it sounded like a mix of tongues, shifting and flowing in ways I didn't understand. As a child, I didn't know what to make of it. It was odd, but it didn't scare me. Now, she was always kind to me, always gentle. She never directed that strange behavior toward me, and she never acted in a way that felt threatening. Still, even as a child, I noticed the patterns. The moments when she seemed fully present, and the moments when she seemed somewhere else entirely. My parents' house had 2 floors, and my bedroom was on the 2nd floor. I remember one particular night very clearly, even though many years have passed. That night, something felt off long before anything actually happened. As I got ready for bed, there was a heaviness in the air. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the room wasn't empty, even though I knew it was. I lay down, pulled the covers over myself, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt uneasy. I kept opening them again, blinking rapidly, scanning the room, even though I didn't expect to see anything. My heart was beating faster than normal, and my thoughts felt scattered. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like anticipation, like something was about to happen, and my body knew it before my mind did. I tried to force myself to relax. I closed my eyes again, opened them, closed them, opened them, over and over. Minutes stretched on. Eventually, exhaustion won. Despite the strange feeling, I finally fell asleep. What happened next has stayed with me for the rest of my life. At some point during the night, my body betrayed me. I started foaming at the mouth without warning. My entire body began to shake uncontrollably. These weren't small movements or light tremors. My arms, legs, torso, everything jerked and convulsed in a way I had no control over. From my throat came a low humming sound, on one that grew louder and louder, vibrating through my chest. The noise was bad enough to wake my parents. They rushed into my room, terrified by the sounds I was making. They found me in bed, shaking violently, sweat soaking through my clothes and sheets, foam at the corners of my mouth. They tried to wake me, shaking me, calling my name, doing anything they could think of to pull me out of whatever was happening. But I wasn't aware of them yet. Inside my mind, I was trapped in a nightmare that felt just as real as waking life. In the dream, I saw my godmother. I felt an overwhelming need to reach her, to hug her, to be close to her. I ran toward her, arms outstretched, desperate. But every time I got close, she vanished. In an instant, she would disappear and reappear somewhere else just out of reach. I kept chasing her, over and over. Each time she moved farther away. The dream was filled with panic and longing. I could feel my body sweating, even in the dream. I could feel the strain, the fear, the frustration. All the while, my real body continued to shake, jerk, and hum uncontrollably in my bed. Eventually, I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the window, and there she was. My godmother stood outside, staring directly at me. Her face was calm, serious, and unmistakable. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Then she vanished. Not slowly, not fading. She was simply gone. The episode ended shortly after that. My body relaxed. The shaking stopped. The humming died away. I was exhausted, confused, and terrified. My parents were shaken, unsure of what they had just witnessed. They stayed with me the rest of the night, watching me closely. Later in life, I learned the truth. My godmother had died that morning. Lung cancer. She had passed away before the night of my episode. No one had told me yet. There was no way I could have known. And yet, that night, she appeared to me in my dream and then again at my window. I've spent years trying to understand what happened. Doctors could explain the physical symptoms. A seizure, perhaps. A night terror. A neurological event triggered by stress, genetics, or something else entirely. From a medical perspective, there are explanations that make sense, but none of them explain the timing. None of them explain why the nightmare centered so intensely on her. Why I felt such a desperate need to reach her. Why she appeared and disappeared, always just out of reach. And none of them explain the moment at the window, the clarity of her image, or the fact that she had died earlier that same day. I don't claim to know what it meant. I don't claim it was something supernatural beyond all doubt. I only know what I experienced and how deeply it affected me. That night changed the way I think about life, death, and the connections we have to the people who care for us. My godmother was a strange woman, yes. She spoke in tongues I didn't understand. She believed in healing through prayer and ritual. She lived partly in a world that didn't quite overlap with everyone else's. But she loved me. I never doubted that. And whatever happened that night, it felt tied to that love. Sometimes I wonder if that was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe it was my mind's way of processing a loss before I consciously knew it had happened. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something we don't yet have words for. All I know is that even now, years later, I can still see her face at that window. Calm, steady, watching, and then gone. It was a dark night about 2 years ago, one of those nights that feels heavier than it should, even before anything strange happens. It was around 10 in the evening, late enough that most people were inside, but not so late that the world felt completely asleep. I was 14 at the time, old enough to roam around with friends without parents hovering, but still young enough to believe that nothing truly bad could happen to us as long as we stayed together. I was with my two closest friends, Stacy and William. No one ever called him Will. I honestly don't know why. It was never discussed. It was just one of those things everyone accepted without question. If someone tried to call him Will, it sounded wrong, like calling someone by the wrong name entirely. So he was William, always. Stacy and William lived on the same block, just a few houses apart. It was one of those neighborhoods that bordered open land, where suburban streets slowly gave way to fields and trees. Every house on their block opened up toward a large field behind them. From the street, everything looked normal and safe. But behind the houses, the land stretched out wide and open, dark and quiet at night. The field itself had a strange layout. Closest to the houses was a wide, flat area of grass that people sometimes used during the day to walk dogs or let kids play. After that flat stretch, the land rose into a short hill, not steep, but noticeable enough that you had to climb it. Beyond the hill was another large flat area that stretched toward the far edge of the field, where a few houses sat farther back behind fences and trees. On the hill stood 2 trees. They weren't especially tall, but they were old and sturdy, with thick trunks and branches that spread out wide. Those trees had become a regular hangout spot for us. They felt like a boundary between the familiar and the unknown. Close enough to the houses to feel safe, but far enough into the field to feel like our own secret place. That night, Stacy and I were sitting up in one of the trees. We had climbed onto a thick branch that let us sit comfortably, our backs against the trunk, our legs dangling down. William was below us, leaning against the base of the tree with his arms crossed, looking out over the field. We weren't doing anything special, just talking, laughing quietly, enjoying the night air. The sky was dark, with no moon bright enough to light the field properly. Most of the light came from the houses behind us. The far edge of the field was especially dark. The houses on that end didn't have their back porch lights on, and there were fewer street lights. Beyond the open grass, everything blended into shadow. It was the kind of darkness that feels deep, not just the absence of light, but something thicker, harder to see through. Without warning, William suddenly shouted. It wasn't a scream, but it wasn't calm either. It was sharp, urgent, the kind of sound that immediately makes your heart jump. Stacy and I both reacted instantly. We straightened up in the tree and followed his gaze, looking out toward the darkest edge of the field. At first, I couldn't see anything. I remember squinting, trying to adjust my eyes, scanning the grass and the shadows beyond it. For a few seconds, there was nothing but darkness and the faint outline of the land. My first thought was that William had seen an animal, maybe a deer or a large dog. The field wasn't completely empty at night. That idea almost calmed me. Then, after about 10 seconds, my eyes picked something up. There were shapes moving at the far end of the field. Not one shape, several. As my eyes adjusted, the shapes became clearer, and my stomach dropped. There were about 8 of them, maybe more. I still struggle to describe what they looked like, because they didn't match any animal I know. Calling them creatures feels dramatic, but figures doesn't quite capture it either. All I knew was that they were wrong. They looked like a mix between deer and bears. They were huge, easily as big as a grizzly bear, But their bodies weren't bulky in the same way. They were leaner, more flexible, like deer. Their movement was fast and smooth, not heavy or lumbering. I remember thinking that something that big shouldn't be able to move that way. Their legs looked wrong too. I could swear they had hooves or something very close to hooves. The shape of their lower legs reminded me of deer, but everything else didn't match. Their upper bodies were thick and powerful, and the way they moved made my skin crawl. They were shaped almost like gorillas. They didn't move fully upright, but they weren't on all fours either. They ran mostly on their hind legs, leaning forward, using their front limbs to help propel themselves, the way gorillas sometimes run using their fists. It was unnatural to watch. My brain kept trying to label them as something familiar, but nothing fit. Stacy and I didn't say anything at first. We just stared. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, not hard enough that it felt like it might give us away somehow. The night felt suddenly very quiet, like all the normal sounds had faded out. I became painfully aware of how exposed we were, sitting in a tree in the open with nothing but air between us and whatever those things were. A few seconds after Stacy and I fully realized what we were seeing, the figures changed direction. They started to sprint. Not walk, not lope. Sprint. They moved with terrifying speed, charging down the field toward the hill and the trees. The grass beneath them barely seemed to slow them down. Their movements were coordinated, almost like a group that knew exactly where it was going. Watching something that large move that fast made my legs feel weak. I remember thinking for one awful moment that they were coming straight toward us. My mind raced. I wondered how fast we could climb down, whether we should run toward the houses or scatter into the darkness. None of those thoughts turned into action because everything was happening too quickly. Fear locked me in place. But then they passed the hill. They didn't slow down as they reached the far flat area. They kept running, heading toward the end of the field where there was a house set back behind a high chain fence. On the field side of that fence were a few trees, clustered close together. The area around that house was darker than the rest of the field, but not completely dark. In fact, it was one of the better lit areas because of a large back window that glowed faintly. As the creatures reached those trees, something impossible happened. They vanished. They didn't jump the fence. They didn't go around the trees. Or they didn't duck behind them. They simply disappeared. 1 second they were there, massive shapes in motion, and the next second the space was empty. I know they didn't jump because, if they had, we would have seen it. The fence was high and the back window of the house would have silhouetted them clearly. We would have seen shadows, movement, something. There was nothing. No sound of impact, no rustling, no outline against the light, just nothing. The field was suddenly empty again, as if nothing had ever been there. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt strange. My ears rang slightly, and my mouth felt dry. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the tree branch. Finally, William broke the silence. His voice sounded different, tight and strained, and he asked if we had seen that too. Stacy answered first, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me clearly from below. We climbed down from the tree without saying much else. None of us suggested going to check the area. None of us laughed it off. The fear was too real for that. We walked back toward the houses together, staying close, glancing back at the field more than once. The rest of the night passed quietly, but the image of those figures stayed with me. When I got home, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them running, their shapes moving unnaturally fast through the darkness. I kept replaying the moment they vanished, trying to understand how something so large could disappear without a trace. In the days that followed, we talked about it a few times, always in hushed tones. Yet we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a group of animals we didn't recognize. Maybe it was a trick of the light, our eyes playing games in the dark. But none of those explanations held up when we described the details to each other. The size, the way they moved, the way they vanished. Even now, thinking back on it, I can still see them clearly in my mind. The field, the darkness, the sudden movement, the way my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I don't know what those things were. I don't know where they went. I don't even know if they were truly physical in the way we understand it. All I know is that 3 of us saw them, at the same time, from different angles, and none of us ever forgot that night. The field looks normal during the day, peaceful even, but whenever I pass by it now, I can't help but look toward the far end, toward the trees by the fence. And for just a second, I wonder if whatever we saw that night is still out there, waiting for the darkness to come back. This is one of the hardest things I've ever tried to put into words because even now, years later, thinking about it makes my chest tighten and my hands shake a little. I was 16 when it happened. It's been 2 years and I still don't fully understand what I experienced that night. All I know is that it changed the way I sleep, the way I think about the dark, and the way I react to the middle of the night. It started like the most normal night imaginable. I was asleep, and sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up because I was thirsty and had to use the bathroom. Nothing felt strange when I woke up. No bad dream, no fear, no sense that something was wrong. I just felt tired and annoyed that I had to get out of bed. The house was quiet, the way it usually is at that hour. Everyone else was asleep. I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, grabbed a drink, then went to the bathroom. Everything felt completely normal. The lights worked. The house felt the same as it always did. No weird sounds, no shadows that made me uneasy. Nothing. When I finished, I went back to my room, closed my door, and got back into bed. That's when everything changed. I had barely laid down when I heard something scratching at my door. At first, my brain tried to brush it off. Houses make noises, wood shifts. Maybe something outside brushed against it. But the sound didn't stop. It was very clear, very deliberate. Scratching. Slow, dragging sounds against the door like fingernails or claws. That's when panic started to creep in. I don't have any pets, no dogs, no cats, nothing that could scratch at my door. That realization hit me hard, and my heart started beating faster. I lay there, staring at the door, my mind racing through explanations that didn't make sense. Then the fear really kicked in. I've always known one thing about myself. I never feel pain in dreams, ever. I know some people do, but I don't. So in that moment, terrified and desperate to know if this was real or not, I bit myself hard. Not a little pinch. I bit down with real force. It hurt like hell. Sharp, immediate, undeniable pain. That's when I completely lost it. If it hurt, then I wasn't dreaming. That meant whatever was happening was real, or at least real enough that my body believed it was. My breathing got shaky. My whole body felt tense, like every muscle had locked up at once. I didn't know what to do. I turned away from the door and faced my window, which was on the opposite wall. I squeezed my eyes shut as tight as I could. I didn't want to see anything. I just wanted it to stop. That's when my door swung open. I didn't hear a handle turn. I didn't hear it slowly open. It just opened. And at the exact same moment, I felt something breathing on my face. Warm breath. Right on my skin. I cannot explain the terror that hit me in that moment. My entire body started shaking uncontrollably. I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. I kept my eyes shut because I was absolutely certain that if I opened them, I would see something I would never be able to forget. The breathing continued. Slow. Steady. Close. I could feel it on my cheek, on my lips. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't faint. It was right there, inches from my face. I could even feel the slight movement of air with each breath. I was frozen but not paralyzed. That's an important detail. Like I could move. I chose not to because I was too terrified to make a sound or sudden movement. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to turn over, to face the other direction. As I turned, the breathing stayed with me. It didn't stop. It followed my face like whatever it was moved with me. That breathing continued for about 5 minutes. I know that because I counted in my head. I had nothing else to hold on to. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3, 4, 5. Those were the longest 5 minutes of my entire life. Every second felt stretched, heavy, unbearable. My whole body was shaking. My jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. I was convinced that if I moved too much, if I opened my eyes, something terrible would happen. Then, suddenly, the breathing stopped. Just like that. No fading, no movement away, just gone. I stayed completely still. I didn't open my eyes. I was too scared to believe it was actually over. My heart was still racing, my ears ringing with my own pulse. I waited, and waited, and waited. It felt like an hour. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open my eyes. The door was open, but there was nothing there. I didn't move right away. I just stared at the doorway, trying to convince myself that I was safe. Then, slowly, I turned my head toward the window. That's when I saw it. There was a figure standing there. I couldn't make out details. I couldn't tell you what it was. It was dark, wrong, not fully shaped. It didn't look like a normal person, but it wasn't clearly anything else either. It was just a presence, solid enough to know it was there. The moment I looked at it, so it screamed. Not a sound like someone yelling from far away. It screamed at me. Loud, sharp, piercing. I felt it in my chest, like the sound itself hit me physically. I slammed my eyes shut and curled up into a ball, pulling my knees to my chest. I was crying at this point, but I don't remember making much noise. I was too scared to scream back. I just wanted it to end. Then I felt a sharp pain on my arm. A scratch. It burned, and I knew instantly that it broke the skin. But I did not look. I couldn't look. I was too terrified to move, too terrified to confirm what was happening. I stayed curled up, shaking, barely breathing. At some point, I turned the other way again, away from where I thought it was. After that, everything goes blank. I don't know if I fell asleep. I don't know if I passed out. I honestly think my body just shut down from the fear. I don't remember anything else from that night. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight was coming through the window. My room looked normal. Too normal. Like nothing bad had ever happened there. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare. Then I remembered the pain. I looked at my arm. There were scratch marks, multiple lines, red, with dried blood. That was when I knew, without a doubt, that whatever I experienced wasn't just something I imagined and forgot. Something happened to me that night. Whether it was physical, psychological, or something else entirely, I don't know. But the marks were real. It took me a long time to feel even slightly comfortable sleeping again. For weeks, I slept with the lights on. Sometimes I barely slept at all. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt threatening. I refused to close my door completely for a long time because the idea of it opening on its own made me panic. I talked to a few people about it, people I trusted. Some of them told me they'd had strange experiences too. Not exactly the same, but similar in certain ways. A few of them suggested sleep paralysis. I looked into it. I read about it. But the thing is, I wasn't paralyzed. I could move. I chose not to because I was terrified. I was awake. I bit myself. I felt pain. I moved positions. I counted time. That's what makes it so hard to accept that explanation, even though I understand why people suggest it. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't claim it was something supernatural. I don't claim it wasn't. I just know what I experienced, and I know how real it felt. Yeah, and I know the effect it had on me afterward. Even now, 2 years later, I have rules. I will not get out of bed between 2 and 3 in the morning. Not for water. Not for the bathroom. Not for anything. If I wake up and check my phone and see that time, my chest tightens instantly. I start breathing fast. My muscles lock up. I feel that same fear creeping back in. I clench my body and force myself to stay still until the time passes. I know it sounds extreme. I know it probably sounds unbelievable to some people, but it happened. I lived it, and it left a mark on me that didn't fade with time. I've never had anything like it happen before that night, and nothing like it has happened since. Just that once. And honestly, that makes it even scarier, because I don't know why it happened. I don't know what triggered it, and I don't know why it stopped. All I know is that something changed in me that night. And every time I think about it, even now, I feel 16 again, lying in my bed in the dark, shaking, counting seconds, praying for something I couldn't see to finally leave me alone. A few years ago, my mom and I took a trip to Six Flags, Hurricane Harbor. It was just the two of us, no big group, no extended family, just a small trip meant to be a quality family vacation. I was a kid, and I was incredibly excited. I wanted to go on everything, the biggest slides, the tallest rides, the ones you could see from across the park that looked terrifying and amazing at the same time. My mom, on the other hand, was not excited in the same way. She had a very different idea of what fun at a water park should look like. In her mind, a perfect day meant floating peacefully in the lazy river, maybe riding one of the smaller slides where you sit on a mat and gently twist around. Nothing intense, nothing that made your stomach drop. She was there for me, not for the rides. But kids don't really understand that. We had barely been in the park for a few minutes when I started begging her to let me go on the huge slides at the back of the park, the really tall ones. The ones that looked like they dropped straight down from the sky. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. I was old enough. There were lifeguards everywhere. It was a controlled environment. She told herself it would be fine. What she didn't anticipate were the lines. The crowds that day were massive, people everywhere. The lines for the big slides stretched far beyond the base of the towers. The staircases leading up to the slides were completely packed, all the way from the ground to the top. From where my mom stood, it looked like a solid wall of people slowly inching upward. She watched me get in line and felt a little bored at first. She figured this would take a while. She leaned against the fence and prepared herself to wait. As time passed, she started to notice something that made her uncomfortable. The staircase. The slide towers were several stories tall. Really tall. And the only thing keeping people from falling off the side of the stairs was a simple handrail. Just a metal rail running up the side. There were no walls, no glass, no netting. The entire space between the steps and the rail was completely open. With that many people crowded onto the stairs, shoulder to shoulder, slowly moving upward, it suddenly looked very unsafe to her. People were wet. The steps were wet. Kids were climbing. Adults were distracted. One wrong move, one slip, one shove, and someone could fall. Her eyes locked onto me. She watched every step I took. She noticed that I stayed close to the handrail the entire time, gripping it as I climbed. That should have made her feel better, but instead, it made her more anxious. She couldn't look away. Her heart raced the entire time I was on those stairs. She stood there, tense, imagining everything that could go wrong. What if I slipped? What if someone bumped into me? What if I lost my grip? She told herself to calm down. I was fine. I was careful. There were lifeguards at the top. Everything was designed to be safe. Thousands of people did this every day. Still, she couldn't relax. Eventually, I reached the top. From one angle, that should have been a relief. I had made it past the stairs. The most dangerous part in her mind was over. But unfortunately, where my mom was standing, the platform at the top and the slides themselves blocked her view of the stairs and the waiting area. Once I disappeared behind that platform, she couldn't see me anymore. All she could see were the slides. 2 big slides side by side. She stood there watching people come down, one after another. Splash, slide, splash, slide, over and over again. She scanned every face, every body, every movement, looking for me. I didn't come down. At first, she wasn't worried. She told herself I was probably just waiting my turn. Those lines at the top could take a while too. People had to grab mats, listen to instructions, sit down, wait for the lifeguard signal. She watched the slides carefully. Still nothing. More time passed. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe longer. Time felt stretched and distorted. Her mind started filling with questions. What if I already came down and she missed it? What if I couldn't find her afterward? What if I went to the other side of the pool? What if I was still standing on the platform and she was just being impatient? She tried to reason with herself. I was a capable kid. I could handle myself. Everyone was there to have fun. Nothing bad was happening. She was overthinking it. Then something shifted. She saw me. Or at least, she thought she did. She saw a child falling. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She watched in horror as a small body fell several stories, straight down the center of one of the slides. For a split second, her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Then she realized the obvious. It was the slide. I wasn't falling off the tower. I was coming down the slide, exactly as intended. Relief flooded through her so fast it almost made her dizzy. I had made it. I got past the stairs. I got onto the slide. Or I came down safely. She watched me splash into the pool at the bottom. I was fine. I was in the water, safe. Then the relief started to fade. She kept watching the pool. People splashed in and climbed out. Kids laughed. Lifeguards watched. But she didn't see me get out of the water. Where did I go? Did I swim underwater and exit somewhere else? Did I miss it again? Her chest tightened. She saw a lifeguard move suddenly. Too suddenly. He ran toward the pool. Her stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Lifeguards don't move like that unless something is wrong. Her eyes locked onto the water. It was me. Or so she thought. She saw a child in the pool, not moving right. Convulsing. The lifeguard was pulling the child toward the edge. The world around her narrowed until nothing existed except that scene. That's my son. My son is drowning. My son is having a seizure. My son is dying. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The crowd suddenly felt like a wall. People everywhere. Bodies in the way. She shoved through them, yelling without realizing she was yelling. Move! Move! That's my son! Let me through! Her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. Panic drowned out everything else. She didn't care if she knocked someone over. She didn't care if she looked crazy. All that mattered was reaching me. As she pushed through the crowd, she started to hear a familiar sound in the distance. Mom? Her heart skipped. She pushed harder. Mom? Louder this time. I'm okay? Or am I calling for help? She could hardly think straight. Someone grabbed her arm trying to stop her, telling her something, but she shook them off. She didn't hear what they were saying. Or she couldn't stop. She had to get to me. People around the pool were staring. A crowd had gathered. No one was laughing now. No one was moving casually. That made the fear worse. She must be close. Is my baby okay? Mom, right there. Someone tugged on her shoulder. She turned. I was standing right beside her. Alive? Wet? Confused? Tugging at her arm because I'd been calling her name for a while. For a second, her brain broke. If I was right there, then who was in the pool? Why was the crowd still staring? Why hadn't anyone relaxed yet? She slowly turned back toward the pool. And then she saw it clearly. The child being pulled from the water. The lifeguard working desperately. The crowd watching in silence. She noticed the hair. Blonde. Plastered to the child's forehead by the water. Just like mine. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked back at me. My hair was also blonde. Also wet. Also plastered to my forehead. Her knees felt weak. The lifeguard managed to revive the other child before I could really understand what was happening. The crowd slowly began to disperse. People started talking again. The tension eased. I didn't see the worst of it. Thank God. She pulled me close, her hands shaking, her heart still racing. Honey, she said, her voice breaking. I thought that was you. I thought you were dead. I didn't understand why she was crying. To me, it had been the best ride of the day. Fast. Fun. Thrilling. I couldn't wait to do it again. I loved the ride. But for my mom, that moment rewired something deep inside her. For a few minutes, she had lived an entire nightmare while standing wide awake in the middle of a crowded water park. She had felt the kind of fear that doesn't come from imagination or stories, but from the very real possibility of losing your child. Her brain had filled in the blanks before reality could catch up. Even years later, she can still feel it. That sudden drop in her chest, the panic, the certainty that something terrible was happening. The moment she realized how easily perception and fear can twist reality. Nothing paranormal happened that day, nothing supernatural. And yet, for my mom, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of her life. Because sometimes the scariest moments aren't about ghosts or shadows or things you can't explain. Sometimes they're about love, and the unbearable thought of losing the person you love most in the world. When I was little, probably around 8 or 9 years old, something happened to me that I still think about from time to time, especially late at night when the house is quiet and my mind starts drifting back to old memories. At the time, I didn't have the words to describe how strange it was. Even now, I'm not sure I fully do. All I know is that it felt real in a way that dreams usually don't, and the details of it have stayed with me far longer than most childhood memories ever do. That night started like any other. I went to bed, pulled the covers up, and eventually fell asleep. I don't remember the dream very clearly, but I remember the general feeling of it. I think it involved a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, or at least something very similar. I had watched a lot of cartoons back then, and those images were always floating around in my head. In the dream, I remember being on a cliff, the way Wile E. Coyote always was, standing right at the edge with nothing but empty air beyond it. At some point in the dream, I fell off the cliff. Normally, whenever I have dreams like that, the moment I start falling, I wake up instantly. It's like my body has a built-in alarm for that sensation. The falling starts, my stomach drops, and I'm awake in my bed, heart pounding, but safe. That's what I expected to happen this time too. But it didn't. Instead of waking up, I kept falling. I remember the sensation very clearly. It wasn't like the fuzzy, unreal falling you usually get in dreams. It felt smooth and oddly calm, like floating downward through the air. There was no panic at first, just this strange, weightless feeling, like my body was suspended, slowly moving through space. It felt real in a way that immediately set it apart from other dreams I'd had. After a few seconds of that, I woke up. Except I didn't wake up in my bed. I fell. I actually fell onto the floor. It wasn't a huge fall, maybe about a foot or so, not nearly as high as the distance from my bed to the floor should have been. But it was enough to jolt me fully awake. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs for a second, and I just lay there, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. When I realized where I was, I got even more confused. I was lying on the floor, perfectly aligned with the foot of my bed. My body was straight, my back pressed right up against the footboard, as if I had been placed there deliberately. It wasn't like I had rolled out of bed sideways or fallen forward. I was positioned in a way that didn't make sense for a normal fall. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the underside of the bed, my heart racing. I remember thinking that maybe I had just fallen in a really weird way. Kids move around in their sleep all the time. Maybe I stood up somehow and fell. Maybe I sleepwalked. I tried to convince myself it was nothing unusual. I got up and looked at my bed. That's when the unease really started to creep in. The sheets were perfectly made. Not messy, not bunched up, not even slightly disturbed. They looked exactly the way they would have if no one had been sleeping in the bed at all. The pillows were in place. The blanket was smooth. There was no clear spot where my body should have been. I stood there for a long moment. He was staring at the bed, trying to make sense of it. I knew I'd gone to sleep there. I knew I had been dreaming. And yet there was no sign of it. I didn't wake my parents. I didn't scream or cry. I think part of me was too tired, and part of me didn't want to make a big deal out of something I couldn't explain. So I climbed back into bed, carefully this time, pulling the covers over myself and lying there awake for a long while. It took about an hour before I felt tired enough to fall asleep again. By then I was less exhausted and more alert, my mind still replaying what had happened. Eventually, sleep came again, and nothing else strange happened that night. For a while I forgot about it. Or at least, I pushed it to the back of my mind. Kids are good at doing that. Life moved on, school, friends, growing up. The memory stayed, but it didn't dominate my thoughts. Then, a few years later, it happened again. I was older this time, old enough to understand that what had happened before was strange, even if I didn't have an explanation for it. I went to bed like usual, fell asleep, and at some point during the night I felt that same sensation. Falling. Or rather, floating. It was the same smooth, unreal feeling, like my body was suspended in midair. There was no panic at first, just awareness. And then suddenly, I came down. This time, I didn't hit the floor. I fell back into my bed. I woke up as I landed, my body dropping onto the mattress from about 6 inches up in the air. I felt the mattress compress under my weight. I felt the bounce. I felt the physical reality of it in a way that made it impossible to dismiss as just a dream. I sat up immediately, my heart pounding, my hands shaking slightly. The room was dark and quiet. Everything looked normal. But my body knew what it had just felt. I knew I hadn't just twitched or jolted awake. I had been above the bed. I had fallen into it. I lay there afterward, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. My mind ran through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a hypnic jerk, that thing where your body jerks as you fall asleep. But that didn't explain the height. That didn't explain the sensation of floating first, or the clear feeling of dropping down into the bed. I checked the sheets again. This time they were disturbed, as you'd expect if someone had just landed in them. That almost made it worse because it confirmed that something physical had happened, not just something imagined. After that second incident, I became more aware of my sleep. I paid attention to how I fell asleep, how I woke up, how my body felt at night. But it never happened again, at least not in the same way. No more falling to the floor, no more dropping from the air into my bed. Still, the question stayed. To this day, I don't know what was happening to me in those moments. I don't know how I could end up that high in the air. I don't know how my bed could be perfectly made after I supposedly slept in it. I don't know why it happened only twice, years apart, and then never again. I've heard explanations over the years. Sleepwalking, night terrors, lucid dreaming, some strange combination of dreaming and waking where the body and mind don't line up correctly. Maybe my brain created the sensation, and my body followed it in some way. Maybe I stood up and laid back down without realizing it. But none of those explanations fully satisfy me. What sticks with me isn't just the falling. It's the clarity of the moments afterward, the awareness, the physical details, the way my body was positioned, the state of the bed. Those things don't feel like the kind of details your mind just invents and then forgets. Sometimes when I think about it late at night, I wonder if there are moments when we're not fully anchored to our bodies. Moments when sleep loosens whatever keeps us grounded. Moments when the line between dreaming and being awake becomes thin enough that strange things can happen. I don't claim to know what it was. I don't even claim it was paranormal. All I know is that it happened, and it left an impression on me that never really faded. Even now, as an adult, when I feel that sudden falling sensation right before sleep, my heart still jumps, and for a split second, I wonder if I'm going to wake up somewhere other than where I fell asleep. Thankfully, it hasn't happened again. But I still don't know how I ever got that high in the air. And that question, unanswered, is what makes those nights linger in my mind long after everything else has faded.
Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new, true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling.
A few years ago, I went through one of the worst periods of my life. It wasn't just sadness or stress. It was an extreme depressive episode, the kind that drains everything out of you and leaves you feeling hollow, heavy, and disconnected from the world. Getting through each day felt like dragging myself through thick mud. Nights were the hardest. Sleep was restless, broken, and never refreshing. Even when I was with someone I loved, I felt alone inside my own head. During that time, I was dating my girlfriend, and one night I was sleeping over in her dorm room. Dorm rooms have their own strange feeling to them. They're not quite private, not quite public. You're surrounded by other people, other lives, other noises, but you're still supposed to feel safe enough to sleep. That night, I fell asleep next to her on her bunk bed, or exhausted in a way that went deeper than my body. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. It felt completely normal. I remember the thought clearly. I didn't feel confused or groggy in any unusual way. I got up, jumped down from her bunk bed, and started walking toward the door so I could go down the hall to the bathroom. It's important to say this clearly. Everything felt real, completely real. There was no dream logic, no fuzziness, no weird transitions. My body felt solid. The room looked the same as it always did. I was fully convinced I was awake. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was still dreaming. As I reached my girlfriend's door, just before opening it and stepping out into the hallway, a strange thought popped into my head. It wasn't prompted by anything. It wasn't something I'd been thinking about earlier. It just appeared, fully formed, out of nowhere. I wonder if there's a ghost nearby. I still don't know why I thought that. It didn't feel playful or curious. It felt neutral, almost idle, like a random observation. And the moment that thought crossed my mind, everything changed. Without warning, I felt a force grab me by the chest and lift me into the air. It wasn't gentle. It was sudden and overwhelming. My feet left the ground and my body arched backward violently, the way you see in movies when some unseen power has complete control over someone. My spine bent in an unnatural way, and I couldn't move or resist at all. I wasn't floating. I was being held. At the same time, I felt intense burning sensations on my eyelids. It wasn't like heat from a fire. It was sharper, more focused, like shapes being pressed into my skin from the inside. I somehow knew they were crosses, even though my eyes were closed. I didn't see them in the normal way you see things, but I felt them, clearly and unmistakably. Then I heard laughter. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear from a person. It was deep, loud, and echoing, like it came from everywhere at once. It was exaggerated and almost theatrical, the kind of laugh you'd expect from a villain in a horror movie. If someone described it to me before this happened, I would have rolled my eyes. I would have thought it sounded ridiculous, over the top, fake. But in that moment, it was absolutely terrifying. The laughter filled my head and my chest, vibrating through me. It felt ancient, mocking, and cruel. There was no warmth in it, no humor. It felt like something was taking pleasure in my fear, in my helplessness. The sound went on and on, rising and falling, growing louder, stretching out longer than seemed possible. The entire experience felt dark. Not just visually dark, but emotionally and spiritually dark. It felt heavy and oppressive, like something deeply wrong was pressing down on me from all sides. I didn't feel like I was in danger in a physical sense. I felt violated, overwhelmed, and completely powerless. There was a sense of absolute control, like whatever this was could do anything it wanted to me, and there was nothing I could do about it. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. But I didn't wake up the way you usually wake up from a dream. There was no snap, no jolt, no sudden realization that none of it was real. Instead, it felt like the dream slowly peeled away from me, like a fog lifting, like a curtain parting. The darkness receded gently, and I became aware of my surroundings again. I was lying in bed next to my girlfriend, exactly where I had fallen asleep. The room looked normal, quiet, safe, real. The transition was so smooth that it was deeply unsettling. It felt less like waking up and more like drifting back into reality, as if I had been somewhere else, and I was gently returning. For a few seconds after that, I still couldn't move. I experienced sleep paralysis. My eyes were open and I could see the room, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't speak or move my arms or legs. That lasted for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt longer because my mind was still reeling from what I had just experienced. Then, suddenly, my body unlocked. and I burst into tears. Not quiet tears, not a few sniffles. I sobbed. My chest heaved, and I couldn't control it. My girlfriend woke up, confused and worried, and held me while I tried to explain what had happened. But even as I spoke, I knew how it sounded. I knew how easy it would be to dismiss. It was just a nightmare. Your depression is messing with your dreams. You watched or read something scary and your brain ran with it. I understand all of that. I really do. But the problem is, this didn't feel like a nightmare. Nightmares, even the worst ones, usually have a certain quality to them. There's a haze, a dreamlike distortion. When you wake up, there's usually a clear separation between the dream and reality. This experience didn't have that line. It felt as real as any waking moment of my life. The fear wasn't abstract. It was physical, emotional, total. Trying to explain experiences like this makes you feel ridiculous. Like a character in a bad TV movie, desperately insisting that something supernatural happened while everyone around you exchanges knowing looks. You start doubting yourself even as you remember every detail clearly. You start minimizing it, laughing it off, calling it just a dream so you don't sound unhinged. But inside, the memory doesn't change. Inside, it stays exactly as it was. I'm not saying I believe a literal ghost attacked me. I'm not saying there was actually some dark entity in the room. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. What I'm saying is that the experience itself felt indistinguishable from reality. My brain created something so vivid, so intense, so complete that for those moments, there was no difference between dreaming and waking life. And that realization is terrifying in its own way. It made me think deeply about people who experience things like this regularly. People with schizophrenia, severe psychosis, or other conditions that blur the line between inner experiences and external reality. Many of them describe encounters with entities, voices, presences, and forces that feel just as real to them as this felt to me. After going through this once, briefly, I felt a deep sense of compassion and sorrow for anyone who has to live with that kind of experience constantly. If this had happened to me every night, or even every few weeks, I don't know how I would have coped. I was already in a fragile mental state at the time. That depressive episode had stripped away my sense of safety and stability. Looking back, I think that state made me more vulnerable to something like this. My mind was exhausted. My emotional defenses were low. Sleep was broken and shallow. All the conditions were there for my brain to produce something extreme. Even knowing that, the emotional impact didn't just vanish. For a long time afterward, I was afraid of falling asleep. I was afraid of that half-awake state, that liminal space between dreaming and waking where the experience happened. I became hyper-aware of my thoughts at night, afraid that a single stray idea could spiral into something overwhelming. Eventually, with time, therapy, and healing from that depressive episode, the fear faded. I never had another experience like that again. Not even close. But the memory stayed. It taught me something uncomfortable but important. Our minds are capable of creating realities that feel absolute. Fear doesn't need an external source to be real. Darkness doesn't need to come from outside. Sometimes the most terrifying experiences come from within, especially when the mind is under strain. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because it changed the way I understand mental health, consciousness, and compassion. It made me realize how fragile our sense of reality can be, and how quickly it can shift when the mind is pushed to its limits. If someone hears this and dismisses it as just a dream, that's fine. I understand why they would. But if it had happened to you, you'd know why it's worth telling. You'd know why it stays with you. And you'd know why, even years later, the memory still carries weight. Because for a few moments that night, I wasn't just dreaming, I was somewhere else entirely. And coming back from that place changed me in ways I'm still understanding. This happened in the mid-1990s, during a time in my life when everything felt out of balance. I was working nights at a grocery store while going to college during the day, and my sleep schedule was completely destroyed because of it. Some days I would sleep in the morning, some days in the afternoon, and sometimes I would only get a couple of hours before having to be up again. I was constantly tired, constantly foggy, and never really felt rested. Back then, I didn't think much about how badly that kind of routine can mess with your mind. I just thought being exhausted was normal. I lived alone at the time, in a converted two-car garage behind a house. It had been turned into a small living space, just big enough for a bed, a desk, a small kitchen area, and a bathroom. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, quiet, and close enough to both work and school. The walls were thin, and the windows were low and close to the driveway. At night, when everything was quiet, the place could feel a little too isolated. Still, I liked having my own space. Around that time, I had been watching The X-Files a lot. It was one of my favorite shows, especially late at night when everything felt more intense. I had also read one of the X-Files books, so my head was full of stories about aliens, experiments, and things that move in the dark when you aren't looking. I didn't think it was affecting me, but looking back, I'm sure it didn't help. That night was my night off from work, which meant something unusual for me at the time. I was actually sleeping at night like a normal person. I remember going to bed feeling tired but relieved, knowing I didn't have to set an alarm or worry about being late. The room was dark and quiet. Nothing felt strange when I fell asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. At least, I thought I woke up. The first thing I noticed was that something felt wrong. I was lying in bed, staring up, and I couldn't move. At all. I tried to shift my arms, my legs, even my head, but nothing responded. The only thing I could move was my eyes. That realization alone was terrifying. Your brain immediately jumps to the worst possibilities when your body refuses to respond. Then I noticed them. There were 3 figures in my room. They were standing close to the bed, moving around it. They were smaller than a normal person, not child small exactly, but definitely shorter and thinner than an adult. They moved quickly, almost too quickly, like they were darting from one spot to another. I couldn't make out any faces. There were no clear features. They were just dark shapes, black silhouettes against the dim room. My heart was racing, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I couldn't even take a deep breath on purpose. Panic set in hard and fast. I lived alone. There was no reason for anyone to be in my room, no roommates, no friends stopping by, no unlocked doors that I knew of. My mind went straight to fear. The figures didn't speak. They didn't touch me. They just moved around the bed, back and forth, like they were observing me. That somehow made it worse. If they had attacked me or said something, maybe my brain could have reacted differently. But the silence, combined with my inability to move, made the whole thing feel unreal and horrifying at the same time. So I remember trying to yell, trying to force my body to respond. Nothing happened. It felt like I was trapped inside myself, fully awake, fully aware, but completely helpless. My thoughts were racing. I remember thinking that this couldn't be happening, that this wasn't real. And at the same time being absolutely convinced that it was. Then, suddenly, a bright light filled the room. It shone through the windows, cutting through the darkness. As soon as the light appeared, the figures started to fade. Not run away, not vanish instantly. They faded, like shadows dissolving when the light gets stronger. Within seconds, they were gone completely. As the light grew brighter, I felt control return to my body. I could move again. I sucked in a sharp breath, my chest tight, my body shaking. I sat up in bed, looking around wildly, expecting to see something left behind. There was nothing. The room was exactly as it should have been. Empty. Quiet. A moment later, I realized where the light was coming from. It was my landlady. She was pulling her car into the driveway outside, and the headlights were shining directly through my windows. The timing was so perfect that it almost felt unreal. Just moments earlier, I had been convinced I wasn't alone. Now, the only presence was a familiar, normal one. I sat there for a long time after that, trying to calm myself down. My heart was still pounding. My hands were shaking. I kept replaying what I had seen in my head, trying to understand it. The fear lingered, even though nothing was actually there anymore. Later on, after I had time to think and research what happened, I found an explanation. It was sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a condition where your mind wakes up before your body does. You become aware, but your muscles are still temporarily shut down, the way they are during deep sleep to keep you from acting out dreams. During that state, it's very common to hallucinate. The brain is still partly dreaming, and it can project images, sounds, and sensations that feel completely real. The figures I saw were hallucinations. The paralysis was real, but temporary. And the trigger was almost certainly my messed up sleep schedule. Working nights, going to school during the day, sleeping at random times, then suddenly sleeping at night again threw my body completely out of rhythm. Add in exhaustion, stress, and hours of watching and reading science fiction stories about strange beings, and my brain had plenty of material to work with. Knowing the explanation helped, but it didn't erase the memory. Even understanding what sleep paralysis is, and knowing how common it actually is, doesn't change how real it feels when it happens. In that moment, logic doesn't exist. Your fear is absolute. Your senses tell you something is there, and your body refuses to let you respond. What stuck with me the most wasn't the figures themselves, but the helplessness. The feeling of being awake and trapped at the same time. That sense of vulnerability stays with you long after the event is over. Thankfully, it never happened again, at least not like that. Once my schedule stabilized and I started sleeping more regularly, the problem went away. But that night taught me something important. Sleep isn't just rest, it's balance. When you mess with it too much, your mind can turn against you in ways you don't expect. Even now, years later, I still remember exactly how that room looked, how those shapes moved, and how relief washed over me when the headlights filled the space. I know what it was. I know why it happened. But in that moment, lying there unable to move, it felt like something far more terrifying. And that's why it's a story that never really leaves you. This happened back when my computer was still set up downstairs in the basement, a decision I regretted almost immediately after that night. Even before anything actually happened, that basement had always given me a bad feeling. It wasn't just unfinished or a little dark. It was the kind of basement that felt wrong the moment you stepped into it, like the air itself was heavier down there. The ceiling was low, the walls were bare concrete, and the lighting was weak even when the power was on. Shadows clung to every corner, and no matter how long you stayed down there, it never really felt like a place you were meant to relax. At the time, though, I didn't have much of a choice. The basement was the only place with enough room for a desk and a computer setup, so that's where it went. I told myself I'd get used to it. I told myself it was just a basement, nothing more. Still, every time I went down there alone, especially at night, I felt uneasy. I never stayed longer than I had to unless I was distracted by something on the screen. That night, I had just bought a new copy of Dead Space. I was excited to play it, even though horror games had always gotten under my skin more than I liked to admit. I convinced myself it would be fine. After all, it was just a game. I turned off most of the basement lights so the screen would be easier to see, sat down at my desk and started playing. For a while, everything was normal. I was focused on the game, moving through the dimly lit hallways of the ship, tense but enjoying the experience. Dead Space does a really good job of building atmosphere. The sound design alone is enough to make your nerves jump. At every distant noise, every metallic clang, every whisper of movement makes you feel like something is about to happen. Even so, I felt in control. I was sitting safely at my computer after all. Then it happened. I was walking my character down one of the ship's corridors when one of those monsters jumped out. The ones with the long arms and blades where their hands should be. It came out fast, sudden, exactly the way the game is designed to scare you. At that exact moment, the power went out. The screen went black instantly. The basement lights died at the same time. Everything went silent. For a split second, my brain didn't even register what had happened. It was like the game, and the real world had collided in the worst possible way. One moment I was staring at a monster on the screen. The next I was sitting in complete darkness, unable to see anything at all. Not my desk, not the walls, not even my own hand in front of my face. The darkness was absolute. I froze in my chair, my heart slamming against my ribs. I remember holding my breath without even realizing it, listening. The basement, which already felt creepy under normal conditions, suddenly felt enormous and empty. Every small sound seemed amplified. The hum of electricity was gone. The computer fans were gone. There was nothing but silence. I counted in my head without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was probably only about 5 seconds, but it felt much longer. Time stretched out in that darkness, every second dragging as my imagination filled in the gaps. My mind immediately started replaying the image of the monster from the game, like it was burned into my vision. I knew it wasn't real, but in that moment, logic didn't matter. Then I heard it. A scream. It came from my neighbor's place, but in the pitch black it sounded so much closer. It was a sharp, sudden scream, the kind that instantly sends a jolt of fear through your entire body. I had no context for it. I didn't know why it happened. All I knew was that I was alone in a dark basement, fresh off a jump scare, and now someone nearby was screaming. That was it. Every rational thought disappeared. I didn't stop to think that it could have been unrelated. I didn't consider that the power outage might have caused it, or that something completely normal could have been happening next door. All my brain registered was danger. I bolted. I jumped out of my chair and ran for the stairs as fast as I could. I couldn't see anything, so I was moving almost blindly, my hands out in front of me, crashing into whatever was in the way. I knocked over a chair. I hit the corner of a table. Something clattered to the floor behind me, loud enough that it sounded like footsteps chasing me. That part terrified me the most. As I ran, everything I knocked over echoed in the darkness, making it sound like something was right behind me. The more noise I made, the more convinced I became that I wasn't alone down there. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I took the stairs 2 at a time, slipping slightly, grabbing the railing to keep myself from falling. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until I was at the top of the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I backed away from the door, breathing hard, listening for any sound coming from the other side. There was nothing. Just silence. The house upstairs felt completely different. Still dark because of the power outage, but familiar. Safe. I stood there shaking, my body flooded with adrenaline, trying to calm myself down. My parents weren't home yet, which made everything worse. I was alone in the house, jumping at every little noise, replaying the scream in the darkness over and over in my head. I refused to go back downstairs, no matter what. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring toward the hallway that led to the basement door, waiting for my parents to get home. Every time the house creaked or the wind hit the windows, my heart jumped. When they finally did come home, I practically ran to them, talking too fast, trying to explain what happened. As soon as I could, I begged them to let me move my computer upstairs. I didn't care where it went. My bedroom, the living room, anywhere but the basement. I told them how scared I was, how dark it had been, how the power went out at the worst possible moment. I don't think they fully understood just how intense it felt, but they could tell I was genuinely shaken. They agreed. The next day, we moved my computer upstairs. I never played games in that basement again. Even now, years later, I still get uncomfortable thinking about that place. The memory of sitting there in total darkness, fresh off a horror game scare, hearing a scream echo through the night, is burned into my mind. Rationally, I know nothing was actually chasing me. I know the scream probably had a normal explanation. But fear doesn't work on logic. To this day, that basement still scares the hell out of me. Whenever I go down there now, even during the day, I feel that same tightness in my chest. I move faster than I need to. I avoid looking into dark corners. And I never, ever stay down there longer than necessary. That night changed the way I see that space forever. Some fears fade with time. That one didn't. I was about 9 years old when the first thing happened. And at that age, your brain doesn't separate imagination from reality the way an adult's does. Everything feels bigger, closer, more intense. Fear doesn't need logic to exist. It just needs a moment. I was at my friend's house, the kind of place I had been to plenty of times before. It wasn't unfamiliar or scary. Our moms were in the kitchen talking, the way adults do when they lose track of time, and they told us to go downstairs. It was me, my friend, and his little sister, who was about 5 at the time. Being sent downstairs wasn't unusual. We'd played down there plenty of times before, watched TV, messed around, done kid stuff. Nothing about the request felt strange. The stairs going down were old wooden stairs. They creaked loudly with every step. I'm the kind that made noise no matter how carefully you walked. I remember holding the railing, feeling the smooth, worn wood under my hand as we went down together. The basement lights were on, but the lighting wasn't bright. It was that soft, yellowish light that leaves shadows in corners. As we were walking down, one of us glanced toward one of the rooms off to the side. I don't remember who saw it first, only that suddenly all 3 of us stopped at almost the same time. In one of the rooms, just standing there, was what looked like a girl. She wasn't solid. She looked see-through, like you could see the room through her. Not glowing, not floating, just standing there, faint and wrong. She didn't move toward us. She didn't reach out. She didn't speak. She just existed in that space for a split second that felt much longer than it probably was. That was enough. All 3 of us screamed and ran back up the stairs as fast as our legs could carry us. We didn't stop to ask questions. We didn't try to understand what we were seeing. Fear took over completely. We burst into the kitchen, crying and yelling over each other, trying to explain what we saw. Our moms rushed over, confused and concerned, and went downstairs to look. Of course, there was nothing there, no girl, no movement, nothing out of place. To them, it was just kids being kids, maybe scaring each other, maybe letting their imaginations run wild. To us, it was real. Even though the figure didn't do anything threatening, the fact that it was there at all was enough to shake us. We didn't go back downstairs for a long time after that. That same year, another incident happened, and this one stuck with me in a different way. I had always been scared of Bigfoot. Even the idea of him terrified me. Something about a giant creature living in the woods, watching people without being seen, really got under my skin. One night, I stayed up later than I normally would have been allowed to, watching a show or story about Bigfoot. I don't remember exactly what it was, just that it focused on sightings, footprints, and people who claimed they'd seen him. By the time I went to bed, my mind was already racing. I lay there for hours, staring at the darkness, jumping at every sound the house made. The longer I stayed awake, the worse it got. Every creak felt intentional. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. Eventually, and I must have fallen asleep, but it didn't feel like rest. I woke up very early, around 4 in the morning. It was still dark outside, the kind of dark where the world feels empty. The house was silent. No TV, no voices, no movement. I remember feeling strangely alert, like I hadn't fully woken up but wasn't dreaming either. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway. On the wall there was a picture hanging there, one I had seen 1,000 times before. It showed sand dunes along the bottom. Nothing special. Just a normal picture. As I walked past it, something impossible happened. Inside the picture I saw movement. A horse appeared, with a man riding it. They moved across the dunes, as if the picture was alive. The horse ran smoothly, naturally, and then, just as suddenly, both the horse and the rider disappeared. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My brain couldn't make sense of what I had just seen. I was absolutely convinced something was very wrong. I yelled for my mom and rushed toward the kitchen, fear pushing me forward. When I reached the kitchen, I saw that the sliding door to the deck was wide open. That sight terrified me even more. In my 9-year-old mind, everything connected instantly. Bigfoot, the open door, the strange vision. I was sure something horrible had happened. I honestly believed Bigfoot had come into the house, killed my family and left me behind, cursed or marked in some way. The logic didn't matter. The fear did. I stood there screaming and crying until my mom came running in, very much alive and very confused. It turned out my uncle had arrived early from out of the province and had come in through the deck door. Nothing supernatural, nothing violent, just bad timing mixed with a terrified child's imagination. Except for one thing. No one could explain the horse in the picture. That image stayed with me for years. Even after I knew the truth about the door, even after I grew older and more rational, that moment never fully lost its power. Because I knew what I saw. It wasn't a blur, it wasn't a shadow. It was clear movement, like watching a scene play out where it shouldn't have been possible. As I grew up, I started collecting moments like these. Not intentionally, but they happened anyway. Little things that didn't fit neatly into logic. Things that could maybe be explained away, but not easily. I've got another paranormal story tied to the James Bond 007 game on the Nintendo 64, but that's a story for another time. That one deserves its own space. And honestly, I wish my dad could tell some of his stories too. He's experienced things that would make most people stop and think twice about what they believe. Looking back, what stands out to me isn't just the fear, it's how real everything felt at the time, how vivid the memories still are. Kids are often dismissed when they talk about things like this. It's easy to say imagination, or dreams, or fear mixed with TV shows and stories. And maybe that's true for some of it, but not all of it. Because there are moments you remember not as a blur, but as something solid. Moments that stay sharp no matter how much time passes. Moments that make you pause when you're alone in the dark, or when a house creaks at night, or when you catch movement out of the corner of your eye. Those moments don't fade easily. They sit quietly in the back of your mind, waiting for the right silence to remind you that there are still things in this world we don't fully understand. This happened years ago, but it still crosses my mind more often than I'd like. It wasn't dramatic in the way people expect scary stories to be. There were no monsters, no ghosts, no blood. Just a moment where a single bad decision almost turned into something much worse. Those moments tend to stay with you longer because you realize how thin the line really is. I was walking home from a party late at night. It was one of those small house parties where nothing wild really happens. Loud music, people talking over each other, a few drinks, the usual stuff. I wasn't drunk, just tired and ready to be home. The streets were quiet in that way they get late at night, when the noise of the day has faded, but the silence doesn't feel peaceful yet. Streetlights cast long shadows, and everything looked a little unreal, like the world had paused. My hometown isn't huge, but it's not exactly safe either. It's one of those places where you grow up hearing about break-ins, sketchy people, and bad situations, but you don't really believe it applies to you. At least, I didn't back then. I was younger, more trusting, and honestly a bit naive. I thought I had good instincts, but I hadn't really tested them yet. As I was walking, a guy in a hooded sweater called out to me. At first, I didn't even realize he was talking to me. Then he stepped closer, just enough to get my attention. He lowered his voice and said, "Hey bro, come with me. I need your help." Something about the way he said it made me pause. He didn't sound desperate or panicked. He sounded calm, almost rehearsed. My first reaction was suspicion. My second reaction was curiosity. I told myself that if someone needed help, maybe I should at least hear them out. Looking back, I can see how stupid that was, but at the time it didn't feel dangerous. It felt awkward, maybe a little strange, but not threatening. So I said, okay. That single word still bothers me when I think about it. I followed him off the main street and down a long driveway. The house at the end of it sat back from the road, partially hidden by trees and darkness. There were no lights on outside, which made everything feel more isolated. With every step, that uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. My mind started throwing out quiet warnings, but I kept ignoring them. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself nothing bad had happened yet. When we reached the side of the house, he suddenly crouched down near the corner, pressing himself close to the wall. His body language changed completely. He wasn't asking for help anymore. He looked tense, focused, like he was getting ready for something. That's when I finally asked, "What are we doing here?" He didn't answer right away. He just turned his head slightly and shushed me, putting a finger to his lips. The sound of that shush made my skin crawl. It wasn't playful. It was sharp and serious, like he was annoyed I'd even asked. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my heart starting to beat faster. I could hear my own breathing. The house was completely quiet. No voices, no movement. Just the faint sound of wind moving through the trees. I remember thinking that this was a terrible place to be standing, that if something happened, no one would hear me. He whispered something like, "Just be quick and get ready to run." "Ah, bro." The way he said it made my stomach drop. Before I could even respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. There was no confusion anymore. No benefit of the doubt. No, maybe this is something else. The blade caught a bit of light, just enough for me to see it clearly. It wasn't huge, but it didn't need to be. The intent behind it was obvious. Whatever he planned to do, it wasn't something I wanted any part of. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't ask questions. I just turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could back down that driveway, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. All I could think about was getting distance between me and that house, between me and that guy. Behind me, I could hear him calling out, telling me to come back, telling me to help him. His voice sounded irritated, almost offended, like I had broken some unspoken agreement. I kept running. Every second felt stretched out. My legs burned. My lungs hurt. My mind raced with awful possibilities. What if he chased me? What if he was faster? What if there was someone else waiting? I didn't know, and that not knowing made the fear worse. I just ran until I reached the street again, where the lights were brighter and the space felt more open. Eventually, I slowed down, gasping for air, my hands shaking. I stood there for a long moment, bent over, trying to calm myself. The street looked normal, quiet, empty, like nothing bad had just almost happened. That contrast messed with my head. It felt unreal, like I had stepped out of a different world and back into this one. I walked the rest of the way home much more carefully. Every shadow made me tense. Every sound made me turn my head. When I finally got inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, just breathing. It took a long time for my body to settle down. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't run. If I had stayed quiet. If I had followed along just a little longer. Would he have forced me to help him? Would he have turned the knife on me if I refused? Would I have been blamed if something went wrong? The possibilities spiraled, each one worse than the last. What scared me most was how easily I had gone with him in the first place. How quickly I had ignored my instincts. All it took was a few words and a calm tone. That realization hit harder than the knife ever could have. It made me rethink every situation where I'd brushed off a bad feeling just to be polite or avoid awkwardness. After that, my view of my hometown changed. I already knew it had a rough side, but this made it personal. It wasn't just stories anymore. It was something that had almost pulled me in. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way some people lingered too long, the way certain streets felt different at night, the way silence could feel heavy instead of peaceful. I never saw that guy again. I don't know what he ended up doing that night, or if he found someone else to help him. I don't know if he ever hurt anyone. That uncertainty sits with me, uncomfortable and unresolved. But I'm grateful that my story ended the way it did, with me running away instead of becoming part of something terrible. Now, when I think back on it, I don't feel brave. I feel lucky. Lucky that the knife came out when it did. Lucky that my fear finally overpowered my politeness. Lucky that I trusted my instincts before it was too late. Some people in my hometown really are just plain dodgy. And sometimes the scariest encounters aren't with things you can't explain, but with ordinary people who make a choice to do something wrong and almost drag you along with them. That night taught me that listening to that quiet voice in your head isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the thing that saves you. Now that I've told my own story, I need to talk about my mom, because whatever has followed me through my life didn't start with just me. Some of it belongs to her too, and some nights it feels like our experiences overlap in ways that are hard to explain but impossible to ignore. My mom has never slept like a normal person. Even when I was little, I knew this was just how she was. She's always been awake when the rest of the world is asleep. Most nights, she only sleeps 2 or 3 hours, sometimes even less. I used to think that was just her habit or her personality, but as I got older, I started to realize that it wasn't just restlessness. It was vigilance. It was like some part of her was always on watch. At night, our house never truly felt asleep. Even when everything was quiet, I could sense that she was awake somewhere, unmoving softly, sitting in the dark, or whispering prayers under her breath. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and see a faint light under her door, or hear the soft creak of the floor as she walked through the house. It became normal to me, but it was never comforting. It felt like the house itself didn't want to rest. There were nights when I would wake up and smell incense burning. Not every night, but often enough that it became familiar. The smell was strong and unmistakable. Thick, smoky, and sharp in the air, clinging to the walls and furniture. We are Greek Orthodox, and incense is something we use during prayer, especially when asking for protection or cleansing. As a kid, I knew that incense was meant to drive away bad spirits. I didn't know exactly how or why, but I knew what it meant when my mom burned it in the house at night. She didn't start doing this randomly. There was a reason, and when she finally told me, it only made things worse. One morning, after a night when the incense smell was especially strong, I asked her why she was doing it again. She looked tired, more tired than usual, but there was something else in her eyes too. Fear mixed with certainty. She told me that her parents had come to her in a dream. She said it so calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. In the dream, they told her she needed to wake up because the devil was in the house. She didn't say it dramatically. She didn't cry or panic while telling me. She just stated it as fact. According to her, she woke up suddenly, her heart racing, with this overwhelming feeling that something was very wrong. Yeah, she said she could feel it in the air, like the house itself had changed. Without thinking too much, she got out of bed and started praying. She lit incense and walked through the entire house, room by room, corner by corner. She prayed out loud in Greek, her voice steady and firm. Not rushed, not afraid, just focused. I remember that night, even though I was young. I remember waking up and hearing her voice drifting through the hallway. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't soft, it was commanding, protective, like she was pushing something back. What scares me the most is that she wasn't the only one who felt it. That night, I felt it too. I was lying in bed, wide awake, even before I heard her moving around. There was this heavy feeling in my chest, like the air was pressing down on me. My room felt wrong, darker than usual, quieter but not peaceful. I remember pulling the blanket up to my chin and just listening. When I smelled the incense and heard her praying, I didn't feel surprised. It was almost a relief, like confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. I knew there was something evil in the house that night. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear whispers or footsteps, but I felt it, deep in my body, in a way that didn't feel like fear from a nightmare. It felt like awareness. And that wasn't the only time. This kind of thing happened more often than I like to admit. Nights where my mom would suddenly wake up and start praying. Nights where incense would fill the house without warning. Nights where I would wake up at the same time, heart pounding, knowing something was off before I even realized she was awake. Sometimes she told me she had dreams. Not always about her parents, but about warnings, about something being in the house that didn't belong there. Other times, she wouldn't explain at all. She would just say she felt it, and that was enough. And the thing is, I never questioned her. Because every time she did this, I felt it too. There were moments when the air in the house felt thick, almost sticky, like breathing through something heavier than air. Lights felt dimmer. Shadows felt deeper. Even during the day, after nights like that, the house felt drained, like something had passed through and left a mark behind. As I grew older, I started to connect these moments to my own experiences. To the black thing I had seen as a child, to the feeling of being watched, to the sense that something was always just outside my vision. It made me wonder if whatever followed me wasn't attached to me alone, but to the house or to my family or to something older that we didn't fully understand. My mom never described seeing anything the way I did. She didn't talk about figures or shapes. Her experiences were more about feeling, knowing, and reacting. She trusted her instincts completely. If she felt something was wrong, she acted. She didn't wait for proof. She didn't doubt herself. There was one night when I found her sitting in the living room, long after midnight, holding her prayer beads. The lights were off except for a small lamp. The house felt tense. I asked her what was wrong. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Then she said she felt like something was testing the house, trying to see if it was welcome. That sentence stayed with me. "I'm testing the house." It made it sound deliberate, intelligent. Like whatever it was could sense fear, weakness, or opportunity, like it knew when we were vulnerable. On nights like that, my mom would walk through the house again, praying and blessing every corner. She would open windows slightly, even in the cold, saying it was important to let bad things leave. She would make the sign of the cross on doorways and walls. Watching her do this was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because she was doing something about it. Terrifying because it meant there was something to fight against in the first place. What makes all of this harder to explain is that my mom is not someone who scares easily. She's practical, grounded, and strong. She doesn't talk about these things lightly or for attention. When she says something feels wrong, it's because she truly believes it is. And over time, I learned to trust her instincts because they matched my own experiences too often to be coincidence. There were nights when she would finish praying and the house would feel lighter. The heaviness would lift. The air would feel normal again. Those nights, I could finally sleep. Other times, the feeling would linger, fading slowly, like something reluctant to leave. Even now, years later, this still happens. She still sleeps very little. She still wakes up suddenly some nights, and sometimes, when I visit or talk to her, she'll mention that she had to pray again, that something felt off. Every time she says that, I get that same familiar chill, the same sense of recognition, because I know that feeling too. It's not fear exactly, it's awareness. It's that moment when your body knows something before your mind can explain it, when your instincts speak louder than logic. People can say it's stress, or imagination, or religious belief shaping perception. Maybe some of that is true. But that doesn't explain how often our experiences line up, how we feel things at the same time, how the house itself seemed to respond. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if my mom's nightly prayers and incense didn't just protect the house, but protected me. Maybe whatever I saw as a child would have stayed longer, or followed me more closely if she hadn't been so vigilant. Maybe the reason I was able to tell things to leave, to stand my ground even as a child, was because I grew up in a house where that kind of spiritual defense was normal. I don't know exactly what was in our house. I don't know if it was one thing or many. I don't know if it was tied to the house, the land, or our family. What I do know is that both my mom and I felt it, separately and together, and that makes it impossible for me to dismiss. Some nights, even now, when everything is quiet, I catch a faint smell of incense in my memory. And I remember my mom walking through the house, praying softly but firmly, pushing something unseen back into the dark. And I remember being a child, lying in bed, scared but also strangely safe, knowing that whatever was out there was not welcome, and that someone was standing between it and me. That knowledge doesn't erase the fear, but it does explain why, no matter how many times something felt wrong, we were still there the next morning. It was the winter of 1997 in Chicago, and even now that place and time feel cold in a way that never fully left me. That year, the winter storms were especially brutal. These weren't just heavy snowfalls. They were the kind of ice storms that coated everything in thick, glassy layers, snapping power lines and knocking electricity out for days. Streets became silent and dangerous, and houses felt cut off from the rest of the world. I was 6 years old then, too young to understand weather reports or emergency plans, but old enough to feel when something about the world was wrong. We lived in a strange house. It was half very old and half very new, like two different eras stitched together. The newer part was still under construction when my parents first brought me there. I remember exposed wood, unfinished walls, and that smell of fresh materials mixed with dust. The older part of the house felt completely different. It creaked and groaned, especially in the winter, like it was breathing on its own. At that age, I didn't really think about the house's history. I was busy being a kid, growing up, learning, playing. Later, I would hear stories about the house, whispers and comments from adults that suddenly made certain memories feel heavier. But at the time, I didn't know any of that yet. The night everything began was the first night of a long power outage caused by one of those storms. The house was dark except for candlelight and the glow of a fire my parents were building downstairs. Shadows stretched in strange ways across the walls, and the quiet felt deeper than usual. Without electricity, the house seemed larger, emptier, and more alive somehow. To get to my parents' shower, I had to cross the hall to reach the master bedroom and bathroom. The hallway layout is still very clear in my mind. It was shaped like a long T with the top of the T holding the bedrooms. Standing at one end, you could see far down the hall, and at night, it felt endless. That evening, I remember standing there, feeling uneasy about being alone upstairs. Something about the darkness and the silence made my stomach twist. Still, I could hear my parents downstairs, moving around, talking, tending to the fire. I remember thinking that it would be quick. Just a fast shower, then I'd be back downstairs where it was warm and bright and safe. I don't actually remember taking the shower. That part is missing, like it was erased or never recorded properly in my mind. The next thing I clearly remember is being back in my bedroom, getting ready for bed. I was putting on my pajamas when I realized I had forgotten them and had to change in my room instead. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp and the faint glow coming from the hallway. That's when I heard it. A giggle. It wasn't loud. It wasn't playful in a normal way. It was soft, almost curious, but it immediately made every hair on my body stand up. My back was turned to my closet, and the sound made me freeze. I remember this intense feeling that something was watching me. Slowly, I turned my head toward the closet, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Nothing was there. The closet door was closed, quiet and still. I turned back toward my bedroom door, trying to tell myself I imagined it. That's when I heard the giggle again. On this time, it was closer. From behind my door, something slid into the room. It wasn't like a normal person walking in. It was smoother, quieter. What came into view was a black figure, a child-shaped figure. It looked like a kid, maybe around my age, but completely dark, like a shadow that had weight and shape. I couldn't see facial features clearly, just the outline of a small body and the sense of movement. My first thought wasn't even fear. It was confusion mixed with a strange kind of annoyance. I remember thinking something like, "You're not supposed to be here, this is my room." I said something out loud, telling it that it shouldn't be there. The figure didn't respond with words. It just started walking toward me, still giggling. The sound made my chest feel tight. I could sense that it wanted to play, like it thought this was a game. I told it again that it needed to leave. Before I fully understood what was happening, it was right in front of me. There was no distance left between us. That's when fear finally hit me, sharp and overwhelming. I reacted without thinking. I kicked forward as hard as I could. My foot went straight through it. There was no resistance, no feeling of impact. It was like kicking through smoke or cold air. That was when I screamed. The sound ripped out of me, raw and panicked. I didn't stop to think or look back. I ran out of my room and bolted down the hallway, down the stairs toward my parents. I remember my feet hitting the steps too fast, my body shaking, my lungs burning. All I wanted was to get away from that room. After that night, things changed. I eventually gave the figure a name, and I called him the Black Thing. I started seeing him a lot at night. Usually it was the same pattern. A feeling of being watched, a shadowy shape, that quiet, unsettling presence. He didn't always come close, but I always knew when he was there. Nighttime became something I dreaded. I learned to sleep with the covers pulled tight, to avoid looking into dark corners, to keep lights on whenever I could. Then there was one night that was different. I was having trouble sleeping, and I ended up in my parents' bed. It was summer by then, warm and humid, the kind of night where the air sticks to your skin. At some point during the night, I woke up feeling absolutely freezing. It didn't make sense. I remember shivering, my teeth chattering, my body tense. Before I even opened my eyes fully, I knew he was there. The black thing was standing at the foot of my parents' bed. The fear came rushing back instantly. I didn't want to look, but something inside me forced my eyes open. Not only was he there, but he wasn't alone. There were three of them. The black thing stood in front, and behind him were two larger figures. I knew, without being told, that they were his parents, a mother and a father. All three of them were looking at me, then at my parents, who were sleeping peacefully, completely unaware. The room felt heavy, thick, like the air itself had weight. I don't know where the courage came from, but I found my voice. I told them they needed to leave. I told them they were not welcome here. The words felt strong, final, like I was drawing a line they weren't allowed to cross. Slowly, they began to fade. Not all at once. It was gradual, like shadows thinning in light. The black thing disappeared. The mother disappeared. The father lingered just a little longer, watching, before he too faded away. After that night, I never saw the black thing again. I never saw the mother again either. For a long time, I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. After we moved to a different house, I saw the father one more time. I was in my room when I noticed him standing there, silent and still, just watching. He didn't approach. He didn't make a sound. And then, like before, he was gone. I was older by then, and I understood enough to know that what I experienced wasn't normal, but I also knew how real it felt. The fear, the cold, the presence. Those things don't fade easily. Even now, years later, I can still picture that hallway, that room, that black figure stepping into my space. Maybe there are explanations. Maybe there are stories tied to that house that I never fully heard, but no explanation has ever made those memories feel less real. What stays with me the most isn't the image of the black thing, or even his parents. It's the feeling of being watched in a place that should have been safe, and the moment I realized that sometimes, being a child doesn't protect you from things you don't understand. That house, that winter, and those nights shape the way I see darkness and silence. Even now, when the lights go out during a storm, part of me is 6 years old again, standing in a long hallway, trying to convince myself that I'll be downstairs in no time. Last night turned into something I never expected, and even now it's hard for me to put into words how deeply it shook me. I was at my own place, alone, not planning to go out or meet anyone. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I remember feeling bored, restless in that way you do when the hours stretch on and nothing feels interesting enough to hold your attention. At some point, that boredom turned into a bad decision. I decided to take some XTC. I had experience with it before, and in my head, I thought I knew what I was doing. Normally, people talk about a dose somewhere around 180 to 220 milligrams, being enough for a strong but manageable experience. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I took far more than that. In total, it was around 700 milligrams. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. I wasn't thinking about consequences or limits. I just wanted to feel something different. Something intense, something to break the dullness of the night. At first, everything seemed fine. I was watching a movie, stretched out comfortably, feeling relaxed. The beginning of the experience was familiar. My body felt warm, my thoughts felt loose, and there was that sense of ease that makes you think everything is going to be okay. I remember thinking I would make the night even better by turning on some music. I decided to put on a Pandora station, lie down in my bed, and just let myself drift. The plan was simple: chill, relax, let the night pass peacefully. That's when things started to change. As I lay there with my headphones on, I noticed something strange. The music began to stutter. At first, I thought it was just a technical issue, maybe a bad connection or my phone glitching. But the sounds weren't normal skips or pauses. They were distorted, broken, almost like strange noises layered on top of the music. It immediately made me uneasy. I pulled my attention away from the music and looked around my room, trying to ground myself. When I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. I saw a person slowly lifting his head from behind my desk. I can still see it clearly in my mind. It wasn't vague or shadowy. It looked completely real. His face, his movement, the way he appeared, all of it felt solid and undeniable. I was convinced without any doubt that there was a real person in my room. I just stared at him. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Time felt strange, stretched out. I must have stared at him for about 30 seconds, frozen. I had my mind racing, but my body refusing to react. Finally, fear turned into anger or panic, and I told him to fuck off and get lost. The words came out sharper than I expected. He didn't respond. He simply lowered his head back down behind the desk and disappeared from view. Strangely, after that, I didn't think much of it. That alone scares me now. Instead of questioning what I had just seen, I brushed it off. I lay back down, rested my head on my pillow, and tried to calm myself. I told myself it was just the drugs, just my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to believe that. That belief shattered a few moments later. As I lay there, I noticed something next to my head. A hand. A creepy, unnatural-looking hand, way too close to my face. Panic hit me instantly. I jumped up from the bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. When I looked, I saw him again. He was lying next to me on the bed. His face was twisted into a horrifying smile, something that didn't look human at all. It was the kind of expression you see in nightmares or horror movies, exaggerated and wrong. Then, just like that, he vanished. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, as if he had never existed at all. Before I could even process that, I felt something drip onto my head. I slowly looked up, dread filling every part of me. On the ceiling above my bed was a large puddle of blood, spreading out in a way that made no sense. And there he was again, smiling down at me, his teeth stained with blood. I remember thinking, what the hell is happening to me? This can't be real. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, hoping that when I opened them, everything would be gone. When I looked again, the blood and the figure had disappeared. My room looked normal, exactly as it always did. That brief moment of relief didn't last long. The next thing I knew, I saw him across my bedroom. He was running straight toward me, screaming. The sound felt like it was tearing through my head. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream back. Just before he reached me, he vanished again, right in front of my eyes. This time, though, something was different. Even when he wasn't visible, I could still sense him. I could see movement in the air, like a blurry outline. It reminded me of the invisibility cloak from Harry Potter, where you can still tell something is there because the air shifts around it. There was this strange, electric-looking cloud moving through my room. Faint but noticeable, like static in the shape of a person. The most disturbing part was that I could feel him. When I reached out and touched where I thought his invisible body was, it felt real, solid. And if I kept my hand there too long, it started to hurt badly, like a burning or crushing sensation. Pain shot through me, sharp and intense, forcing me to pull my hand back. He kept appearing and disappearing at random. Sometimes he would scream. Sometimes he would try to bite me. Sometimes he would hit me or lunge toward me just to scare me. It felt like he was tormenting me on purpose, feeding off my fear. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't escape my own room, my own mind. Eventually, he stopped appearing. The room felt quiet again, but not peaceful. I was shaking, exhausted, drenched in sweat. I thought maybe it was finally over. Now that was when other strange things began to happen. I started seeing cats in my closet. At first, there was just one. It sat there calmly, staring at me. I blinked, confused. Then there were more. Soon, there were several cats, filling the space, watching me silently. It was unsettling, but not as terrifying as the man had been. Still, it didn't feel right. Every time I got out of bed and moved closer to them, trying to touch them, they disappeared. The moment I got too close, they were gone, leaving the closet empty again. After that, I started seeing people I knew, friends, co-workers, familiar faces. They appeared as if they were really there, and I had full conversations with them. The conversations felt real at first, normal even, but something was always slightly off. Their behavior wasn't quite right, and their expressions didn't match their words. There was a strange tension underneath everything they said. At one point, I became aware of that wrongness and decided to ask about it. I asked one of them, a guy I work for, why he was acting so strangely. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Who do you think you are talking to?" I blinked, and in that instant, his face changed. He turned into the horror figure again. The same smile, the same mocking expression. He smirked at me, did a few random, unsettling movements, and then vanished once more. After that, I think I lay on my bed for about an hour. Time had completely lost its meaning. My bed was soaked with sweat. Anyone who has taken XTC knows how intensely you can sweat, and at that point, it was overwhelming. The sheets were wet and uncomfortable, but I didn't have the energy or the courage to move. When things finally started to calm down, I felt almost normal again. Tired, shaken, but no longer actively terrified. That's when I dropped my phone. It slipped out of my hand and fell under the bed. I lay down on the floor to reach for it, stretching my arm underneath. That's when I saw him for the last time. He was under the bed, waiting. He lunged toward my hand, trying to bite me. I yanked my arm back as fast as I could, my heart racing all over again. In pure panic, I flipped the bed over, convinced I would finally catch him, finally see something solid. But there was nothing there. He was gone. After another 2 or 3 hours, my body finally gave in. I fell asleep, more from exhaustion than peace. When I woke up, the nightmare didn't feel like it was fully over. Since that night, I've been having small panic attacks. I can't sleep with the lights off anymore. It's been about 6 weeks now, and the darkness still scares me in a way it never did before. I was later diagnosed with HPPD. On top of that, I keep seeing shadowy figures everywhere. Shadow people, they call them. They appear in corners of rooms, in doorways, just at the edge of my vision. They don't always do anything, but their presence is constant, like they're watching me. If you look it up, you'll find countless people describing the same thing, seeing the same shapes, the same figures. That almost makes it worse. I know some people will say it's not possible to hallucinate like this on XTC. I've heard it before. But MDMA can cause more than just euphoria. It can change how you perceive reality. It can bring on derealization, depersonalization, altered perception of space and time, anxiety, fear, and yes, visual hallucinations or pseudo-hallucinations, especially at high doses. Some of it can even convert into MDA in the body, which increases the chances of hallucinations even more. I also didn't drink any water that night. Between the extreme dose and dehydration, I was pushing my body and mind far past safe limits. People have died from much less. I know that now. What I went through felt real in every possible way. The fear was real. The pain was real. And the after effects are still real. Even now, when I close my eyes, parts of that night come back to me. The smile, the feeling of being hunted in my own room, the sense that something was there, even when I couldn't see it. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. It didn't feel like a bad trip that passed and faded. It felt like something broke inside me, something that hasn't fully healed yet. And that's the part that scares me the most. I was in middle school when this happened, and even now, years later, it still makes my stomach feel tight when I think about it. At the time, it didn't feel like a big dramatic horror story. It felt small and personal, which somehow made it worse. It was one of those nights that should have been completely normal, even happy, and instead, it left me with a feeling I still don't like sitting with. It was a birthday party for one of my friends. Nothing fancy, just a group of us hanging out in her basement after school. The basement was the usual kind you find in suburban houses. Low ceiling, old couch pushed against one wall, a TV with a game console hooked up, and boxes stacked in corners that hadn't been opened in years. We were sitting on the floor and couches, laughing too loud, talking over each other, and doing all the dumb things middle school kids do when they feel safe together. Someone had music playing quietly in the background, and we were passing snacks around, half paying attention to the TV, half lost in our own conversations. At some point during the night, one of my friends looked down at her phone and frowned. She said she had just gotten a text from a number she didn't recognize. At first, none of us thought much of it. Getting random texts wasn't totally unheard of, and prank messages happened sometimes. She read it out loud to us, or at least the part she remembered clearly. The message said something about being able to see us and that we were pretty. The exact wording is fuzzy now, but the meaning of it stuck. Someone claimed they could see us right there, in that basement. We all laughed at first, but it wasn't a relaxed laugh. It was that kind of nervous laughter where you're trying to convince yourself it's nothing. I remember saying something like, "They're just trying to scare us." I didn't want anyone to freak out, and honestly, I didn't want to freak out either. I told my friend to ask them to prove it. In my mind, I was sure they couldn't. I was convinced it was just some kid messing around, maybe someone from school who had her number. Once I said that, everyone started throwing out ideas on how the person could prove it. Someone suggested asking what color her hair was, but we all quickly realized that was a bad idea. Almost everyone there had either blonde or brown hair. Guessing that wouldn't be impressive at all. Another person joked about asking what we were wearing, but we were all dressed pretty normally. Nothing stood out. Then I had an idea. I had been wearing this stupid hat all night. It was just a regular hat, but I kept calling it my gangsta hat, as a joke, over and over again. I don't even know why. It was middle school humor, and at the time it felt hilarious. I suggested asking, "What have I been calling my hat all night?" It felt specific enough that there was no way someone outside the basement could know that, unless they were actually there. We talked about it for a bit, but in the end we didn't send anything back. Someone said it was better to just ignore it, and we all agreed. We tried to go back to what we were doing, telling ourselves that if we didn't give the person attention, they would stop. We turned the music up a little and tried to focus on the TV again, but the mood had shifted. It wasn't as relaxed anymore. I could feel it, even though no one said it out loud. Not long after that, my friend's phone buzzed again. She picked it up, and this time she didn't read it right away. Her face changed first. She looked confused, then scared. When she finally read it out loud, my heart dropped. The message said that her hair was brown, and that I was wearing my gangsta hat. For a moment, nobody said anything. The room felt very quiet, even though the TV was still on. It was like the sound didn't matter anymore. My chest felt tight, and I remember getting this cold feeling in my arms. That wasn't a guess. That wasn't something someone could easily figure out. We hadn't told the person anything. We hadn't replied at all. After that, the texts kept coming. Not constantly, but often enough that it felt deliberate. The messages were random. Sometimes commenting on what we were doing, sometimes saying things about us being pretty. None of them were openly threatening, but that almost made it worse. It felt invasive, like someone was watching us and enjoying the fact that we didn't know who they were. We started throwing out explanations again, trying to calm ourselves down. Maybe it was someone we knew hiding outside as a joke. Maybe someone from school lived nearby and could see into the basement window. Maybe someone had been invited earlier and was messing with us. Each explanation sounded weaker the more we talked about it. The basement windows were small and high up, and it was dark outside. You couldn't clearly see into the room from the yard, especially not details like what I'd been calling my hat. I remember becoming very aware of my surroundings. Every shadow in the basement seemed darker. Every sound from upstairs made me jump a little. I kept glancing toward the windows, even though I knew I probably wouldn't see anything. I hated the idea that someone might be watching us, and I hated that I couldn't do anything about it. Eventually, we decided it had to be someone from school. That was the only explanation that felt even slightly normal. Some jerk who got my friend's number and thought it would be funny to scare a group of girls. We told ourselves that people did dumb things like that all the time. We tried to laugh it off again, but this time it didn't work as well. The rest of the night passed, but it didn't feel the same. We stayed close together and no one really relaxed again. When it was time to leave, I felt relieved but also uneasy. Walking out of the house and into the night air made me feel exposed in a different way. I kept looking around, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching us leave. I didn't see anyone, but that didn't make me feel much better. Nothing ever came of it after that night. The texts eventually stopped, and we never found out who sent them. No one ever admitted to it. There was no big reveal. No explanation that made everything make sense. Life went on, like it usually does, especially when you're young. But that feeling stayed with me. Even now, what bothers me most isn't the messages themselves. It's the feeling they gave me. That sense of being watched without knowing by whom or from where. I don't like that feeling at all. It's quiet and unsettling, and it doesn't go away easily. That night taught me that fear doesn't always come from something obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it comes from not knowing, and from realizing that you might not be as unseen as you think. This is one of those cases that people who lived through it never really forget. Not because it's mysterious or unresolved, but because of how disturbing, intimate, and senseless it was. It happened in a quiet neighborhood, involved children who knew each other, and unfolded in a way that shocked an entire city. For those of us who were in middle school at the time, it felt like the kind of story that shattered the illusion that terrible things only happen far away, or to other people. In Jacksonville, this case had everyone on edge, glued to the news, afraid to let their kids out of sight. On November 3rd, 1998, 8-year-old Maddie Clifton disappeared. She lived in a suburban neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida, the kind of place where kids played outside, rode bikes, and went from house to house without much concern. Maddie was well known in the neighborhood. She was friendly, energetic, and often played with other children nearby, including a boy named Josh Phillips, who lived just across the street. Josh was 14 years old at the time. When Maddie didn't come home, her parents became worried quickly. This wasn't like her. She wasn't the kind of child to wander off without telling anyone. As hours passed and no one could find her, fear set in. The police were notified, and what started as a missing child report quickly became a massive search effort. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on a neighbor named Larry Grisham. Grisham had a troubling past. He had been arrested twice before, many years earlier, in cases involving sexual battery. In both instances, the charges were dropped. But the arrests alone were enough to make him a person of interest. When Maddie disappeared, investigators looked closely at him. He failed a lie detector test related to the case, which only deepened suspicion, but he provided an alibi that police were unable to disprove. Despite this, after several days with no solid leads, the police officially scaled back their active search. To the community, that decision felt unthinkable. Parents, neighbors, and volunteers refused to stop looking. More than 400 people continued searching on their own time. They combed woods, checked abandoned buildings, passed out flyers, and talked to anyone who might have seen Maddie. A reward was offered for information. At first it was $50,000 and later it was doubled to $100,000. The case gained national attention. The FBI became involved. Flyers were distributed all over Jacksonville and even handed out at a Jaguars versus Bengals football game where thousands of people could see Maddie's face. America's Most Wanted offered to feature the case. For an entire week, Maddie Clifton's disappearance dominated conversations. Parents walked their children to school. Kids were warned not to talk to strangers. Fear settled into everyday life. One of the volunteers helping with the search was Josh Phillips. That detail would later become almost unbearable to think about. A week after Maddie disappeared, the search ended in the worst possible way. Josh's mother, Melissa Phillips, was cleaning his room. Josh had a waterbed, and she noticed that it appeared to be leaking. At first, she thought it was just a problem with the mattress, but when she looked closer, something didn't seem right. The smell was wrong. The leak didn't look like water. When she investigated further, she made a horrifying discovery. Maddie Clifton's body was hidden inside the pedestal of Josh's waterbed. The shock of that moment is almost impossible to imagine. This wasn't a remote location or a hidden forest. This was inside a family home, directly across the street from Maddie's own house. Melissa Phillips didn't hesitate. She ran out of her home, crossed the street, and went to the police immediately. Josh Phillips was arrested that same day at his school. He was taken into custody and held in maximum security. News spread rapidly. The community was stunned. The idea that Maddie had been in that house the entire time, while hundreds of people searched for her. While her family waited and hoped, while Josh himself helped look for her, was almost too much to process. An autopsy revealed the full extent of the violence. Maddie's cause of death was determined to be a combination of stabbing and blunt force trauma from a baseball bat. The injuries were severe. This was not a simple accident followed by panic. The evidence showed sustained violence. Josh eventually told investigators his version of what happened. He claimed that he and Maddie were playing baseball one afternoon. According to him, he accidentally hit her in the eye with the bat. The injury caused Maddie to scream. He said he panicked, terrified that his father would find out. Josh described his father as abusive and violent, someone whose anger he feared deeply. In his panic, Josh dragged Maddie into his room. He said he strangled her with a phone cord for around 15 minutes. After that, he struck her again with the baseball bat and stabbed her 11 times. He then hid her body inside the waterbed pedestal, where it remained for days. It's difficult to understand how a child could escalate from an accident to such extreme violence. Even taking panic and fear into account, the length of the attack and the number of injuries point to something far beyond a momentary loss of control. Investigators and psychologists would later struggle with this same question. Josh was charged with first-degree murder. Because of the massive media attention in Jacksonville, his trial was moved to Polk County. The case had already saturated the local community, and finding an unbiased jury in Jacksonville was nearly impossible. The trial drew national interest. People followed every detail closely, trying to make sense of what had happened. During the trial, it became clear that Josh had no prior criminal record and no known history of violent behavior. Teachers and neighbors described him as quiet, shy, and unremarkable. That only added to the confusion. How could someone like this commit such a brutal crime? Police searches of the Phillips home turned up another disturbing detail. Investigators found violent pornography in Josh's possession. While this alone doesn't explain the murder, it became part of the broader conversation about his mental state, influences, and capacity for violence. Experts debated whether fear of his father, sexual curiosity, exposure to violent material, or a combination of factors played a role. And Josh himself said that his primary motivation was fear. He claimed that if his father had found Maddie inside the house, especially injured, the consequences would have been severe. In interviews later aired on a program called Too Young to Kill, 15 Shocking Crimes, Josh said that if he could take it back, he would. During that interview, he broke down into tears. Whether those tears reflected genuine remorse, self-pity, or something else entirely, is something people still debate. The jury found Josh Phillips guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Under Florida law at the time, because he was under 16 years old, he was not eligible for the death penalty. The sentence meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The fallout from the crime didn't end with the verdict. Maddie Clifton's parents, Steve and Sheila Clifton, were devastated. The loss of a child in such a violent and personal way is something no family truly recovers from. In the years following the trial, they divorced. Grief has a way of reshaping everything, including relationships that once felt unbreakable. Josh Phillips's family also unraveled. His father, whom Josh had described as abusive and terrifying, later died in a car accident. That fact adds another layer of tragedy and unanswered questions to the story. There would never be a full reckoning with the family dynamics Josh claimed drove his fear. For Jacksonville, the case left a lasting scar. It changed how people thought about safety, about neighbors, about the assumption that danger always comes from outside the community. Maddie wasn't taken by a stranger in a van or lured away to some distant place. She was killed by someone she knew, someone who lived across the street, someone her parents likely trusted. The detail that haunts many people the most is that Maddie was there the whole time. While search parties walked the streets, while her face was on flyers and television screens, while her parents waited desperately for news. Her body was hidden in a bedroom, feet away from normal life continuing around it. This case also forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about youth violence. Josh was not an adult predator. He was a teenager. That doesn't make the crime any less horrific, but it complicates how people understand it. It raises questions about responsibility, punishment, and whether someone so young can fully grasp the consequences of their actions. At the same time, the brutality of what he did makes it impossible for many to feel anything but anger and revulsion. Years later, the name Maddie Clifton still carries weight in Jacksonville. For those who lived there at the time, it's not just a true crime story, it's a memory of fear, of community heartbreak, and of innocence lost in a way that felt especially cruel. The case doesn't offer comfort or neat explanations. There's no single cause that makes it make sense. Fear, abuse, panic, exposure to violence, and immaturity may all have played a role, but none of them can justify what happened. They only describe the path that led there. What remains is the reality that an 8-year-old girl lost her life in a way no child ever should, and that a 14-year-old boy made a choice that destroyed multiple families, including his own. It's a story that stays with people because it reminds us how fragile safety can be, how quickly ordinary life can turn into something unimaginable, and how the most dangerous threats are sometimes the ones closest to home. Maddie Clifton should have grown up. She should have gone to school, made friends, argued with her parents, dreamed about her future. Instead, her life ended in a neighbor's bedroom, hidden away while the world searched for her. That's why this case still feels so deeply messed up, even decades later. Not because it's mysterious, but because it's painfully clear, and because nothing about it should ever have happened.
Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.